Picture this. You're out driving, visiting the more rural towns of your home country. It's been a long trip, hours at a time or sometimes full days spent on the open road, with brief stops taken only for gas and snacks. Every time you hit the next town, you stop for the night, maybe book a day or two at a local hotel to rest. Then you're right back out on the road again. It's been a little while since you left the last town, and it's starting to get late. The sun is dipping behind the horizon, and pretty soon it'll be night again. You don't think it's a good idea to keep driving all through the night until tomorrow. You need to sleep. The one problem is, you don't know the highway you're on all that well, and the people at the last town didn't mention there being anywhere else to stay for at least a few more miles. But then you turn on the radio, accidentally tuning into some kind of locally produced tourism ad. Through the airwaves and the ever-growing evening darkness, you hear,
"Welcome to Chalkland, a nice rural town with a population who just can't bear to leave. Located just off the freeway, you'll find our town is filled with all sorts of colorful folks who love nothing more than to greet new faces. From the moment you arrive, you'll see firsthand the Chalkland locals' love for art and expression. And we even encourage our younger residents to get in on the fun and let their creative flair show. Chalkland. Once you're here, you just won't be able to leave."
Chalkland? You've never heard of the place. It wasn't on any of the maps when you planned out your route, and it doesn't even show up on your car's GPS. And what's more, the people at the last town you visited never said anything about it. They said the nearest neighboring city was much, much further away. Did they lie? Why wouldn't they tell you that this other town was closer? You spot a road sign up ahead, pointing towards the turn for Chalkland, and decide to try your chances. A good night's rest and you'll be back on the road. Or so you think. In any small town, there are bound to be secrets. Local legends, ghost stories, even grudges between families that have lived there for generations. No matter how friendly and unassuming a place might seem on the surface, there's always bound to be something that people just don't talk about. The township of Chalkland, otherwise known as SCP-277, is no exception, hiding a fair few secrets of its own. Although the locals don't know it, they are living their seemingly ordinary lives under constant surveillance. Operatives of the SCP Foundation have been integrated among the townsfolk, embedded within the civilian population to monitor some of the strange happenings going on in this otherwise normal town. So why not take a walk with us through Main Street, down the avenues of Chalkland, as we draw your attention to some of the mysteries of SCP-277. The first thing you'll probably notice as you stroll around town are all the chalk drawings. They're everywhere, on the sidewalks and the outer walls of buildings, scribbled on trash cans and houses. Practically every playground in town has been turned into an urban art installation for these colorful children's drawings. Not at all that weird at first glance, right? Perhaps it's a good thing that the town encourages its kids to express themselves by having them draw all over the town with chalk. But these images coating the town, on every street corner and alleyway, they weren't drawn with chalk. These apparitions found throughout the area of SCP-277 might look like harmless art, but not one of them was created in the way you might expect. Little Timmy didn't spend a few minutes on his hands and knees dragging a lump of chalk over the concrete. Oh no. The drawings found around Chalkland seem to be projected directly from the minds of the town's children. All their thoughts, their wild and unfiltered imaginations have somehow been plastered all over every surface you can find. The Foundation calls these images instances of SCP-277-1, with almost all of them appearing as figures drawn in white outlines. Creepy, isn't it? Like part of a crime scene. Luckily, some of these projections take the form of beanstalks, spaceships, anything from the imagination of the child manifesting them. An instance of SCP-277-1 doesn't possess any physical form, or any substantial three-dimensional body, and the size, shape, and style and complexity of each drawing varies, all depending on the child that creates them. Additionally, it's only children that have the capacity to produce these images. Anyone over the age of pubescence is completely unable to do so. As for how exactly the children of Chalkland create SCP-277-1 instances, well, most of the time they aren't even aware that they're projecting their thoughts into the form of these anomalous drawings. It is an entirely unconscious and involuntary process. It's hard for the SCP Foundation to put an exact number on the number of children in Chalkland, given the sheer size of the town and its population. So, predicting the exact number of active instances of SCP-277-1s at any one time is pretty tricky, if not downright unfeasible. The Foundation agents embedded among the townsfolk have been able to confirm that these drawings or projections are capable of interacting with fellow SCP-277-1 instances, while physical objects can pass through them without causing or sustaining any form of damage. It is due to this factor that the children living in SCP-277 can often be seen playing with their chalk projections, and the existence of these living drawings is viewed as a totally normal and everyday occurrence by the adult residents of Chalkland. In fact, you can ask anyone who grew up living in SCP-277, any lifelong local born and raised in Chalkland, and they will tell you that the living chalk projections of the town's children have existed as long as the town itself has. According to the claims of the older residents, SCP-277-1 instances have been appearing in Chalkland for years and years, dating all the way back to when SCP-277 was first colonized and the earliest settlers arrived in the town. However, the Foundation isn't so sure that these claims are 100% accurate. For one, they can't even find a single record of SCP-277 existing before the 2000s. Even those living in neighboring towns refuse to believe that Chalkland is a real place that exists. Adding to the mystery surrounding the town of SCP-277 is the fact that all of its inhabitants also don't seem to exist, or at least have no official record of their existence anywhere else. According to tests conducted by the Foundation, the dental, DNA, and fingerprint data of everyone living in SCP-277 don't match any recorded persons on national population databases. And on top of that, none of the Chalkland residents have any memories of living anywhere else other than the mysterious town, or ever having traveled anywhere outside it either. No vacations, road trips, not even as much as a visit to relatives in the next town over. Naturally, before they implanted covert agents among the locals, the SCP Foundation's initial attempt to contain SCP-277 was to evacuate the civilian population. The plan was to remove the people from the vicinity of the town, relocate them, and then assess the local area's anomalous properties. What was it about that specific town that caused the chalk projections to manifest? Why were none of the residents' details anywhere on the national databases? And how could a single one of them never have once left the confines of Chalkland? Evacuate and assess, that was the goal. But naturally, things weren't as simple in practice. Multiple failed evacuation attempts were made, with some unforeseen incidences causing the operation to go awry. In an attempt to combat this, the SCP Foundation tried to vary the specific details of its evacuation strategy each time, but even then they couldn't get the people out of the town. What was perhaps far stranger was that every time the Foundation attempted a new evacuation, the civilians living in SCP-277 denied having any memories of the earlier failed evacuations. There was so much disbelief in the occurrence of these prior evacuation attempts that it caused the Foundation to question if these attempts even took place. The only record of the failed evacuations existing were in their own files. On the odd occasion that Foundation operatives were able to get one or two residents of SCP-277 far enough away from the town, they learned it was an exercise in futility. After spending any longer than a few brief minutes outside the borders of Chalkland, a resident would suffer some sort of violent incident. The exact nature of what would happen to them has been redacted. However, we know for a fact that they weren't killed just by leaving the town. Shortly after, these evacuated civilians would be found back within SCP-277, with no memory of ever having left the town. But what was causing all of these attempted evacuations to fail? What exactly was preventing the townsfolk from leaving? Well, the answers to these questions may be found in a unique instance of SCP-277-1, which are far more actively hostile versions of the chalk drawings that were collectively given the designation SCP-277-1-R. These instances first came about sometime before the Foundation started attempting to evacuate Chalkland. One of their agents, undercover within the town and monitoring anomalous activity, spotted a seemingly standard SCP-277-1 projection in the shape of a rabbit. It wasn't a drawing that had been noticed previously, so it wasn't present in any reports coming out of SCP-277. But yet, there it was, at the local library. None of the town's children admitted to being responsible for casting this new projection. Unusual, but not uncommon. After all, they are kids. Think about it. We're sure that as a kid you might have done something that you didn't fess up to when a grown-up asked you. Granted, you probably never cast a psychic projection onto a library, though. The Foundation agents within SCP-277 knew that the instances of the chalk drawings could often be good indicators of the psychological state of the child that manifested them. So they aimed to keep an eye out for any further SCP-277-1-R rabbits with a matching drawing style. Turns out the agents found plenty more of these rabbits. Before long, sightings of SCP-277-1-R instances had tripled in frequency since that first one appeared at the library. But what was it that made these projections different from the regular SCP-277-1 chalk drawings? Well, Agent Davis of the SCP Foundation witnessed a cluster of these rabbit projections across the street from a diner. They were silently watching people or cars that passed by at a nearby intersection. The rabbits didn't play like the other sketches. Suddenly, the agent heard a scream from a little girl. She had been playing with her own chalk drawings that took the shape of a pony with wings. Agent Davis turned around to see one of the rabbits attacking the little girl's sketch, practically consuming the drawing thanks to instances of SCP-277-1 being able to interact with each other. At the same time, the attack seemed to cause the little girl to suffer some form of seizure. All around, the rest of the rabbits were doing the same, seeking out other chalk drawings and devouring them, tearing them apart and causing the children that created their own SCP-277-1s to suffer the same seizure. Ultimately, any child who had their projection attacked by a rabbit collapsed soon after and slipped into a coma, with attempts to awaken them proving unsuccessful. 3 months later, all of the rabbit drawings seemed to have vanished, with no clue if they had come from a child or were created from the town of SCP-277 itself. The local civilians gave mixed responses when asked, some claiming to have no memory of the event that put multiple children into comas. Meanwhile, other townsfolk simply stated that this sort of thing happens in Chalkland every few years. SCP Foundation staff noticed that the residents of SCP-277 seemed to smile too wide when they explained this, as if their town was a fairy tale, and that the massacre was just a part of a happy ending. Still, if you're thinking of stopping at Chalkland, maybe it's safer to just keep driving. The fabric of our world is littered with strange doorways if you know where to look for them. Tears, portals, anomalies, all leading to places and planes beyond human imagining and understanding. And SCP-2317, otherwise known as a door to another world, certainly fits that description. Contained and kept at all times under the watch of armed guards, SCP-2317 appears to be a simple and unsuspecting wooden door in its frame. It hardly looks like it requires such extreme round-the-clock security, or needs a strange, secretive ritual that the Foundation performs, presumably to keep the door closed. But of course, sometimes the most interesting thing about a closed doorway isn't where it leads, it's what it keeps out. Even by the Foundation's already high standards, the requirements and regulations for personnel who are assigned to SCP-2317 seem oddly specific. Psychological testing is standard practice to work for the Foundation, but an additional hurdle that anyone has to clear before even getting to glimpse at this unassuming wooden door is having a score of at least 72 on the Milgram Obedience Examination. It is also mandatory that personnel assigned to maintaining it are both unmarried, with no children or next of kin, as well as an unwavering, unquestioning loyalty to the Foundation, pure devotion to its code and objectives. These may seem like strange requirements, After all, SCP-2317 is just a door, isn't it? Perhaps there's a reason that the Foundation keeps so much of the information about SCP-2317 buried deep under layers upon layers of security, with only the Overseer Council privy to the full details of its strange nature. Knowledge, as they say, is power. But maybe knowing too much about whatever is behind that door can prove deadly. Still, if SCP-2317 is a door to another world, an alternate dimension, or parallel reality, it must be safe enough to visit. After all, the Foundation has been sending personnel in there on a regular basis. Daily, in fact. According to the O5 Council, this is done as part of a procedure to maintain active containment of something lurking beyond that old wooden doorframe. But what could possibly warrant such constant maintenance and surveillance? In accordance with the Foundation's guidelines, all staff are required to rotate out of observing SCP-2317 after every 2 months, and spend the following 3rd month in full psychological counseling before they are permitted to return to the containment unit housing the door to another world. It was after one of these month-long periods of evaluation that a Foundation guard was informed that his security clearance has been raised to level 3, and that he'd been selected for the duty of carrying out 220 Calabasas. He knew the name instantly. This was the title given to the daily containment procedure that absolutely had to be carried out. The guard didn't question these orders. After all, he'd been selected precisely because of his loyalty to the Foundation. He did make one request to his commanding officer, however. He wanted to know what had happened to the last guard that had performed the procedure.
Didn't make it out of psychological evaluation,
the officer replied. Not letting this affect his dedication, the guard was told to prepare for Procedure 220 Calabasas, along with a fellow member of Foundation security personnel. The guard was instructed to gather everything on a strange list. The first was a pre-selected member of Class D personnel, specifically a convicted murderer. Class D refers to disposable class personnel, expendable individuals recruited by the Foundation for the sole purpose of testing SCPs. Class Ds were usually prison inmates repurposed for SCP testing, and the one chosen for 220 Calabasas was no exception, serving multiple life sentences for murders, or at least that's what the guard had been told. A Foundation personnel member instructed him to refer to the Class Ds solely as the assistant from that point on. Next, the guard collected a live chicken, an obsidian-edged knife, a silver aspergillum and aspersorium, to be filled with 500 cc's of holy water that have been blessed by a priest of the Abrahamic faith, and finally, a 1 kiloton nuclear device, which according to instructions was only to be detonated in the unlikely event of a catastrophic containment failure. In other words, the last resort. After following his instructions to the letter and without question, the guard and his colleague were briefed. The Foundation personnel member informed them that he'd be joining and leading them in the procedure. The staff member also specified that henceforth he'd be referred to as the Celebrant until the completion of 220 Calabasas. The guard was acutely aware of how specific these instructions were, but trusted in the Foundation, knowing that if they wanted this procedure performed a certain way, then it was in everyone's best interest to carry out the orders to the letter. But what the Celebrant then went on to explain raised far more questions about SCP-2317 and the nature of Procedure 220 Calabasas. The Class D joining them wasn't actually a Class D. The assistant, as they were now referred to, was in reality another Foundation staff member, with a Level 4 security clearance specifically tailored to SCP-2317. Every member of staff entering through SCP-2317 and taking an active role in 22 Calabasas needed to be informed that this assistant was not to be harmed or treated as a member of disposable class. Fighting back the nagging question of why the Foundation would employ this subterfuge, the guard, along with his fellow security officer, the Celebrant, and assistant, prepared for their departure through the door to another world at solar noon, when the sun was highest over SCP-2317. Solar noon, chickens, and holy water. This all seemed like an oddly occult combination for the Foundation. As they entered the old wooden door, beyond lay a barren salt plain, stretching out for kilometers in every direction. This alternate dimension, according to the briefing, was designated SCP-2317 Prime, The guard immediately noticed a ring of 7 pillars directly ahead of the group as they entered, each of them bearing intricately detailed engravings unlike anything from any era of ancient history. Procedure 220 Calabasas was carried out quickly but carefully, the guard watching as the celebrant and assistant were careful not to miss a step. First, the celebrant scattered holy water into the center of the pillars with the aspergillum and aspersorium, looking down at his feet and keeping a steady pace as he stepped counterclockwise around them. The guard watched intently as the celebrant completed his circuit around the pillars and turned to the assistant, anointing his head with holy water. 7 seals, 7 rings, 7 thrones for the Scarlet King, he said aloud. The assistant, with the obsidian blade in his hand, took the chicken and dispatched it in sacrifice, letting its blood mix with the holy water. He then repeated the celebrant's circuit in the opposite direction before stepping into the center of the stone pillars. Blood for the old gods, water for the new king, the assistant recited, pouring the remaining mix of blood and holy water over a patch of salt in the middle of the 7 pillars. Even though he knew it wasn't his place to question the foundation, as the 220 Calabasas procedure took place, the guard couldn't help but wonder what all this was for. It seems so ritualistic, like something deeply religious or even magical. He never bought into all that occult mumbo-jumbo, even while working for the Foundation. But he had learned not to question anything, even the strangest and most inexplicable of sights. Little did he know that beneath his feet was an ancient and unknowable horror, a beast chained and lying in wait. Contained in a chamber directly underneath the pillars sat an impossibly large creature. Humanoid and obese, its body covered entirely in scales thicker than armor plating. Branch-like horns protruded from its jawless head, pointing up to chains that hung from the 7 pillars above, each one hooked into the entity's back. All but one of the chains was broken, a final withering shackle keeping the Devourer of Worlds in its underground prison. Ever since 1894 BCE, when Erexian mystics imprisoned it, the Devourer has been waiting patiently for its inevitable freedom. It knows, as well as the Foundation, that nothing can be done to prevent the final chain from one day breaking. Even Procedure 220 Calabasas won't keep the creature contained. It's nothing more than a smokescreen, an act designed to create an illusion of active containment and maintain Foundation morale until a permanent solution can be devised to keep SCP-2317 imprisoned. Of course, if the guard had known this, it would have also explained the need for a 1-kiloton nuclear device as part of this staged ritual. Procedure 220 Calabasas had all the components to trick everyone below the O5 Council, emulating religious and occult rituals, the increased level of security surrounding the procedure and its purpose, and telling staff that any failure to correctly and completely perform the 220 Calabasas procedure will result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. All these elements work together to conceal the truth that one day the Devourer will escape and lay waste to our dimension. Knowledge is power, and maybe knowing too much truly is deadly. Perhaps if the guard had learned any of this, he'd have understood why his predecessor never made it out of psychological evaluation. Maybe if he had questioned the purpose of Procedure 220 Calabasas, he'd have learned the true nature of SCP-2317 and what that doorway kept out. But he was loyal to the Foundation through and through. As the team finished performing 220 Calabasas and returned through the wooden door, the guard took one last glance over his shoulder at the vast salt plain. The entire dimension was calm, silent, but not peaceful. It was patient. The entity had waited centuries for its time, and now all it would take was the breaking of this 7th and final chain. One day. The door was closed behind the guard as he, the celebrant, the assistant, and his fellow security officers stepped back through. Their work done and, as far as they knew, preventing catastrophe for another day. Only the Foundation higher-ups, the Overseer Council, are aware of the true danger posed by SCP-2317 and its sole inhabitant. Current predictions are that at some point within the next 30 years, the Devourer of Worlds will be freed. Any and all attempts to repair or recreate the chains holding it in place have so far failed. As such, the O5 Council has elected to continue providing Foundation personnel with the ignorant hope that Procedure 220 Calabasas is an effective strategy for containment. As we've said, sometimes the most interesting thing about a closed door isn't where it leads, it's what it keeps out. In the case of SCP-2317, the unassuming wooden door holds at bay an ancient creature of untold power that will one day break free and wreak havoc in our dimension. Nothing the Foundation does can prevent it, or keep it contained behind the door to another world. And only the Overseer Council knows that any and all efforts to do so are futile. With all that in mind, we can only hope that the doorway of SCP-2317 stays closed, at least for a little while longer. The calm before the storm. As a metaphor, it normally means a lull that occurs just before a huge and often catastrophic event takes place. However, there is such a thing as a literal calm before a storm. The saying comes from a weather phenomenon where a tranquil period of stillness and serenity takes place, only for the winds to start picking up, the rain to start falling, and the storm to suddenly begin to hammer down. Nobody likes being caught outside when a thunderstorm rolls into town, but thunder isn't always the worst part of a storm. That sudden and unsettling flash of lightning that unpredictably cracks across a dark sky. The electricity, erratic and volatile in behavior, might just be the part that startles you into wishing, hoping, praying to return to the calm before the storm. SCP-938 is an entity composed of sheer electrical energy. Forget the notion of a simple dynamic current with an unassuming physical form, and imagine more. A creature composed of pure, relentless electricity. Far from just a benign and passive phenomenon, SCP-938 is considered a formidable and menacing predator by the SCP Foundation. What kind of prey could a being made out of electricity be interested in hunting? Well, that's easy. Power grids. During moderate electrical storms, SCP-938 will appear traveling through the static electricity carried by such storms. Lightning strikes are a form of static electricity, and when they are expelled, SCP-938 uses these strikes to attack its prey. So picture it, a stormy night, the rumble of thunder overhead. Every booming sound is accompanied by a bright flash, maybe even a forked spike of lightning that appears for a brief second. And carried within that lightning is SCP-938, hurtling through the sky towards its target, the nearest electrical grid. Now at this time, it is unknown whether or not SCP-938 actually actively causes electrical storms to occur. Research into the weather patterns in the areas the entity has appeared has proven inconclusive, and there is no proof that this power-based predator is able to influence the weather. However, the second that SCP-938 as a lightning strike makes contact with the nearest power grid, the surrounding area normally suffers a complete loss of all power. Street lamps will go out, plunging the entire city or town into total darkness. This doesn't last forever though, as you might expect. You see, this creature has the potential energy of a storm, much like the ones it uses to travel. SCP-938 isn't out to absorb more energy from national or local power grids, or at least certainly not all at once. What the entity actually does is the following. After a brief loss of power, SCP-938 will quietly infiltrate an electrical grid that provides energy to a town, city, state, or even an entire country. From within, the entity then chooses a structure seemingly at random to monitor. These are usually occupied buildings like homes, offices, or apartment complexes, with plenty of people inside. And no, it doesn't then delight in turning on its charge and frying all those inhabitants, transforming the building into a giant bug zapper. But the more people in the structure, the more electrical appliances and devices you're likely to find inside. SCP-938 stays dormant for a while, hiding out in the power grid, and is usually only detectable by special equipment designed to monitor electromagnetic fields. However, the next time a storm comes a-rolling into town, the living electrical energy wakes up and begins to cause havoc. The easiest to spot indicator of this is that SCP-938 will normally begin interfering with any electrical devices in the structure it has chosen. Its goal is to cause enough disruption that it draws the attention of the inhabitants living there. People inside the building will quickly realize that their appliances aren't working as they should be, sparking and malfunctioning to an alarming degree. These devices will then even cause severe electrocutions to any who come into direct physical contact with them. In every case, this increased electrical activity has caused the neural impulses of anyone in the chosen building to be shut down, resulting in death. There are only 2 instances where this didn't happen. In 1987, during an incursion with SCP-938, 2 victims had their hearts stopped after being electrocuted by devices affected by the entity. Fortunately, these 2 individuals survived after being successfully resuscitated but suffered long-term psychological damage as a result of the incident. Both were noted to have lost significant portions of their memories, and even had their mannerisms and personalities dramatically altered. After a storm, SCP-938 will return to the atmosphere, once again in the form of a lightning strike, and free from the power grid it was previously hiding in. From that point, the entity will aim to repeat the process all over again in a new location, fixating on a new building and claiming the lives of more innocent civilians. However, this is not a set-in-stone pattern of behavior for SCP-938. Analysis of the electromagnetic field readings taken in the creature's vicinity show that it is at least somewhat capable of the same level of conscious thought as most human beings, displaying similar electrical fluctuations to the neural activity of a human brain. Perhaps it is through this disembodied capacity for thought that SCP-938 occasionally chooses a specific person to pursue. Although it is unclear what criteria the electrical entity looks for in a target, the creature has been known to fixate on a single individual and track them for an extended period of time. In one instance, SCP-938 pursued a target for 36 years, 11 months, and 6 days, until that person died of natural causes. These targets, designated as SCP-938-A, will experience symptoms similar to those suffered by individuals suffering from various stress or paranoia-related psychological disorders. This includes the rapid onset of conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. SCP-938-A instances will also quickly develop severe phobias, even if they have never exhibited these previously. However, these aren't what SCP-938 looks for in a victim. Instead, these disorders and conditions seem to be directly caused by the influence of the entity itself. But the side effects of being in the vicinity of SCP-938 don't stop there. In fact, some of the SCP Foundation's own personnel have been affected. According to several members of Theta-9, a mobile task force codenamed Bad Moon Rising, being close enough to the entity can trigger subtle yet unsettling hallucinations. The most common of these is the sight of a cluster of eyes that glow with iridescent colors, meaning that they appear to change shade when viewed from a different angle. Reportedly appearing in poorly lit areas, these eyes seem to watch a person that is suffering from this hallucination. The iridescent eyes have been seen in the shadows of other people as well as appearing in dense foliage like brushes or hedgerows. Even after the Foundation was able to successfully contain SCP-938, staff reported that these hallucinations still continued to persist. But while on the topic of containment, you're probably wondering, how does the SCP Foundation manage to keep a being of pure electricity secure? Well, with great difficulty is the short answer. They actually spent almost half a century trying to contain SCP-938. Why did it take them so long? In part, that was down to the wildly unpredictable nature of SCP-938 and how it moves using electrical storms. Sure, predicting exactly where and when a storm is going to hit isn't impossible, just tricky to achieve with pinpoint accuracy, especially if you're deciding in advance which day to go to the beach or have a picnic in the park. But even if you knew beforehand that a storm was on its way to an area, there is no indicator that SCP-938 would be coming with it. There's squirrely little anomalies like that. Another factor preventing the Foundation from containing SCP-938 was a simple case of poor timing. When they first encountered the entity, it was still 1943, a time when they didn't even have close to the sufficient technological advancement required to track and contain the creature. The entity was, after all, made from a tremendous amount of electrical energy, more than could be safely stored in any one device or location with the tech available in 1943. All the Foundation could hope to do was mitigate the threat that SCP-938 posed, focused on trying to predict its movements and behavior. For a while, containment just seemed like it wasn't an option. 6 years later, the first instance of SCP-938-A appeared. This was the person that we mentioned earlier, who the electric energy entity followed for almost 37 years. In this case, the Foundation security personnel were able to get to SCP-938-A first, and kept them out of the grasp of the predatory power-based creature. These security forces soon became part of Mobile Task Force Theta-9, and they took charge of ensuring SCP-938-A remained safe. And for a while, they achieved this, until the target died of a heart attack in 1986. You already know that part, but what you don't know is that 10 minutes before the target's death, an ambulance arrived at the Foundation's safe house. No member of Bad Moon Rising had called the emergency services, and the local dispatch center hadn't even received a call for assistance to that safe house. The emergency dispatcher on duty that night had spotted an unanswered request for an ambulance on his computer terminal. It's almost as if something had interfered with the machine in order to lure the ambulance into responding to SCP-938-A. This is what prompted the Foundation to once again consider the possibility of containing SCP-938. They knew it would be an expensive endeavor. This was 1986 after all. But as soon as a possible new SCP-938-A target had been identified, the Foundation had the perfect bait to catch the creature that had eluded them since the 1940s, luring it in with its new target. SCP-938 was successfully captured and contained within a capacitor bank at a Foundation research site. A capacitor bank is a series of electrical capacitors, joined and kept in parallel with each other for the purposes of storing electricity. Think of it as a big battery, except there is a key difference between the two. While batteries store electrical energy as some form of chemical energy like lithium, a capacitor is, in basic terms, designed to store pure electrical energy. Exactly like what SCP-938 is made from. Containment wasn't without its teething problems, however, and SCP-938 almost made an escape in 1991. Biocontainment and Research Site 06 suffered a Silent Night breach scenario, and SCP-938 was able to cause considerable damage to the site's infrastructure. The building itself was left completely unsalvageable, and the capacitor bank for storing the entity had to be rebuilt before SCP-938 was recaptured. The new capacitor bank was moved to Biocontainment and Research Site 07 and kept in a fully electrical insulated storage warehouse. The entire structure was built to have no wiring or electrical systems of any kind, with no metal supports in the concrete it was constructed from. Even staff with pacemakers or metal prosthetics aren't allowed inside. There is nothing conductive, nothing metal, nothing electrical. In short, there is no way SCP-938 could ever escape again. Hopefully, at least. Just as long as no one brings anything electronic into Storage Warehouse 0. Unfortunately, on December 21, 2005, a Foundation doctor entered the warehouse as a part of a routine inspection of the creature's ongoing containment. What this doctor had clumsily forgotten was that he had been carrying a USB flash drive on his person, and didn't realize his mistake until the next day. After he recognized his error, he submitted the memory stick for examination, only to find that everything stored on it had been wiped and replaced with indecipherable, meaningless data. All we can really do is hope that the data is all that was on that flash drive. After all, surely SCP-938 wasn't able to breach its containment again and escape hidden on a USB stick, right? Perhaps it's best to play it safe, just in case. Next time there's a thunderstorm in your town, maybe leave home and go for a drive somewhere far away for a while. The last thing you'd want is something lurking throughout the wires in your house, waiting and ready to strike.
For more than 100,000 years, humanity has buried their dead. We commit the bodies of our deceased to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in the hope that one day, our dearly departed might get to enjoy some form of eternal life. But eternal life might be less appealing than it sounds. Perhaps there's a reason that humans bury their dead. Maybe it's so that the dead stay buried, and luckily, they do, at least most of the time.
accessible only via a cargo elevator, and not marked on any official Foundation blueprints. Beneath the northwest corner of Overwatch Command lies SCP-5555. This SCP isn't a creature or carnivorous monster. It's not a gateway to another dimension or an entity with the power to rewrite the very fabric of reality itself. No, SCP-5555 is a mass grave filled with corpses, a pit of unknown origin and indeterminable death. Each body exhumed from within SCP-5555 shows various anomalous traits. These bodies can be removed from the mass grave without any incident, but given the incalculable depth of this vast corpse-filled pit, continued excavation of SCP-5555 would likely only reveal further bodies and fewer answers as to how they came to be buried beneath the Foundation's Overwatch Command. The bodies recovered during the initial excavation of SCP-5555 vary in their physical attributes, as well as their causes of death, when one can even be determined. One body appears to be a man whose age and ethnicity are both unclear, as is how he died, but his body is perfectly preserved, showing no signs of decomposition. Another of the corpses has its head covered with a burlap sack and a noose tightened around its neck. When these are removed, they reveal an identical noose and sack underneath. When those are removed, they reveal another, and on and on and on. The cause of death in this instance is at least apparent: strangulation, suggesting that the deceased was intended to suffer before their death. Some of the other bodies removed from the pit include one belonging to a middle-aged Aleutic woman whose entire skeleton is formed of ice that doesn't melt under increased temperatures, while a different body is a human male with 80% of its organs surgically replaced with artificial ones, driven by gears and mechanisms that continue to tick away long after death. An adolescent female with dark blue skin has two severed hands grasping its throat, while a Caucasian woman was found with both of her eyes gouged out. Perhaps most curious of all is the coffin, crafted from black stone that cannot be opened. All attempts to open it have been resisted by some form of internal force keeping the coffin shut. While it's unable to be opened, it is believed to contain a human inside, a coffin with a person inside of it. Those familiar with the objects contained by the Foundation may make a connection to SCP-076 Able, a humanoid entity also contained inside a coffin. A curious connection too, as you'll come to see when dealing with SCP-5555, the appearance of many familiar faces may be more than just vague connections. None of these corpses, or their various anomalous properties, answer any of the pressing questions about SCP-5555's exact nature and origin. In fact, the bodies found within the grave only raise new questions about this seemingly bottomless pit that the Foundation was either built over or knowingly hides beneath its lowest depths. The truth behind SCP-5555 is shrouded in mystery. Unanswered questions piled on top of each other like the bodies in the mass grave itself, a pile that stacks all the way up to the highest levels of the Foundation's own administration. In actuality, the bodies buried in SCP-5555 are part of a vast and insidious game, played by the heads of a number of GOIs, or groups of interest, as well as the SCP Foundation's very own administrator. But how do the corpses of these anomalous beings factor into the aforementioned game? And what is the ultimate outcome? Examining the file describing SCP-5555, albeit with adequate O5 security clearance, answers some of these burning questions about the mystery at play. Dr. Everett Mann, the current O5-1, was the first to uncover the existence of SCP-5555 and the corpses contained within it. Mann created a series of notes detailing his findings, intended for his successor. In these, Mann claimed that the administrator, one Francis Fritz Williams, the only figure with authority above that of the O5 Council, blackballed him, meaning Fritz Williams had voted against allowing Dr. Mann to remain a member of the SCP Foundation. Everett Mann had believed the administrator to be his friend, so naturally, it came as a surprise when Fritz framed him for an elaborate plot to eliminate Mann's fellow Overseer Council members. Based on the information from his own O5-1 predecessor, Mann believed whoever took up the role after he was voted out would have to take up the role of killing Fritz for the good of the Foundation. But what connection between Fritz and a pit full of anomalous corpses could possibly warrant Mann's urging his successor to eliminate the Foundation's administrator? Dr. Mann's notes to his successor continued with detailed instructions as to how they would go about killing Fritz, and that firstly, they would require a lair. Mann himself was holed up in an isolated Arctic shack for 3 decades after being blackballed by the administrator, before Fritz sent his own private death squad after the former overseer. Mann stressed the importance of having a defensible, isolated location, stocked with armed guards and traps for his successor to lie in wait for Fritz. It was because of the traps Mann had set in his shack that he was able to escape Fritz's death squad with his life. Secondly, Mann urges his new O5-1 successor to always have several escape plans in place, and to be prepared to leave the lair, or indeed any other location, at any time. Dr. Mann also suggested telling falsified escape plans to close friends, in case Fritz got to them first, or finding an SCP that allows the new O5-1 to teleport to safety. Third, Mann suggests the need for multiple fully stocked safe houses. After all, escape plans are entirely pointless unless you've got somewhere secure to actually escape to. Everett Mann also suggested, much like his advice with escape plans, to have fake safe houses or SCP anomalies on hand to get you to the real ones. How does one obtain access to an SCP? According to Mann, placing moles or blackmailing personnel within every Foundation facility is one way, as doing so granted him access to SCP-278, a hat that makes its wearer practically invisible, which came in handy during his escape. Of course, installing your own trusted moles is a potentially tricky feat to accomplish, given that Fritz has the entire Foundation and many other groups of interest in his thrall. But if anyone has the power to do so, and by extension the power to bring Fritz down, it would be another Overseer. Of course, Mann's plot to eliminate Fritz and highly detailed words of warning to his successor do little to explain the pit full of anomalous corpses. Contained within the file for SCP-5555 is an email to the Foundation's administrator from the CEO of Wondertainment, an anomalous toy manufacturer and one of a number of groups of interest to the Foundation. In it, the CEO congratulates Fritz on an excellent win and asks for a copy of an unknown file, as well as mentioning the leaders of other groups of interest, such as the Church of the Broken God. According to the email, this unidentified file was to be sent physically as opposed to electronically, giving Dr. Mann his next lead in uncovering the mystery of SCP-5555. Mann traveled to the headquarters of Wondertainment, Wonderworld, to retrieve the file, using his special hat to avoid detection. Seems like an easy enough task, except Wonderworld is a pocket dimension that slowly transforms human beings into something else. Time working against him, Mann hastily made his way to Wonder Tower and attempted to recover the file that would maybe give him all the answers to this bizarre, twisted mystery. Unfortunately, Wondertainment's CEO, Dr. Holly Wondertainment, got to him first. Confronted by Dr. Wondertainment, Everett Mann demanded to know who was involved in the scheme, besides her and the administrator. He posited that the O5 Council might be somehow involved, but Dr. Wondertainment claimed that the game being played was above and beyond their little numbers club. Holly proceeded to point a large acid-filled super soaker at Mann and ordered him down onto his knees when he asked what purpose of the mass grave SCP-5555 was. Following a fight and the apparent death of Dr. Wondertainment, Mann escaped Wonderworld with the file, containing an updated version of the SCP-5555 description and containment procedures. The key points featured in this SCP-5555 document are mentions of sealing the mass grave with concrete after completing the turnover and re-establishing the facade. It also mentions that any already cataloged SCP entering the pit will die, with its personality, attributes, and any anomalous qualities being passed on to a new entity. which will appear close to the location of the initial SCP's discovery. So the pit can not only kill any SCP that enters it, but can also instantly recreate them, with slight differences, and reposition them. Does this mean the bodies in SCP-5555 are those of former SCPs? To answer that, we'll have to take another look at the corpses. Let's take a look at some of these bodies and try to make some connections. We already discussed the similarities between the coffin and SCP-076 Abel, the entity who also rests inside a large black coffin. Next, we have a corpse dressed in yellow, with a burlap sack covering its head, tightened in place with a noose. And removing it causes another sack and another noose to appear under it. If you ask us, that sounds a lot like SCP-701, The Hanged King's Tragedy, which revolves around a play that heralds the arrival of a mysterious entity that calls itself the Hanged King, a being with connections to the extra-dimensional realm of Alagada. The Hanged King entity in SCP-701 revels in decadence and chaos, so maybe it's better for it to be thrown into SCP-5555. Next, we have a corpse that's been altered with mechanical gears. That certainly sounds familiar too. SCP-217 is a virus that turns the body into a clockwork being, replacing organs and tissue with the appearance of gears and metal. Foundation researchers even noticed the similarity between the body and the appearance of a corpse fully transformed by SCP-217. But there's also the connection to Dr. Charles Gears, the famed researcher who acts as cold as ice, and frequently researches anomalies with connections to the Mechanite religion and the Church of the Broken God. It's been long rumored that Gears' body is also altered, taking on the appearance of Clockwork. There's no telling what this connection means, but it's definitely something to think about. Next, in our retrospective, we have a white woman whose eyes were gouged out. While this doesn't exactly narrow anything down, the corpse's secondary anomalous properties certainly do. Photographs of the body show a pair of blue eyes that, when viewed through video, follow the camera. A girl and a camera? That sounds a lot like SCP-105, the photographer formerly known as Iris Thompson, who can manipulate the images in the photographs she takes on her camera. Iris is typically one of the friendlier, more approachable anomalies housed by the Foundation, and seeing her like this is heartbreaking. So if the corpses in the pit are former SCPs themselves, and existing objects are reincarnated and modified after being placed there, how many times has this happened over the years? Hidden files display text results involving numerous ultra-famous anomalies, including SCP-173, which reappeared in an art exhibit before it was contained again. But Foundation researchers were shocked to find that this time, the statue was made of concrete, giving it the appearance we all know today. Another test example involved SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, who was lured into the pit using a vial of liquid that he was convinced contained a vital component to his medical mission. SCP-049 reappeared in France, this time wearing the familiar Plague Doctor mask over his apparent previous attire, a gas mask. There had been mention of some sort of game being played by the Foundation administrator and the heads of various groups of interests, involving a number of anomalies and the killing and recreation of different SCPs, many turning into those that exist within the SCP archive. After Dr. Everett Mann's encounter with Dr. Holly Wondertainment, an email to Fritz from the head of the Global Occult Coalition congratulated the administrator for an exciting addition to the game in the form of Dr. Mann tracking the GOI's leaders. Some, such as the leader of the Church of the Broken God, contacted Fritz to express their displeasure at including the risk of being murdered by Mann. They claimed that introducing such a rogue element to the game after Fritz had already won felt like an indulgent victory lap. In addition, one reported that Holly Wondertainment had proclaimed dying to be unpleasant when she had woken up after Mann had seemingly killed her. In trying to uncover the truth about this sinister game, Mann had found himself an unwilling participant. It appeared that the administrator and the GOI leaders were immortal, and while they could be temporarily killed like Dr. Wondertainment, it wasn't exactly an enjoyable experience. Some GOI leaders even theorized that Fritz introduced man to their game as a way of eliminating them, or their organizations. However, man had no desire to kill any of them, apart from Fritz himself, the leader of the entire game. In his notes, man urges his 05-1 successor to share the SCP-5555 file with the other members of the 05 Council, to spread awareness of the danger that Fritz, his various conspirators, and their game poses. Traveling to England, man attempted to obtain Fritz's location from Robert Bomero, High Priest of the Church of the Broken God. However, he found himself trapped by Bomero and Herman Fuller, head of another group of interest, the Anomalous Circus. Fuller knew that man had worked alongside Fritz for years and could prove useful for the next round of the game, while Bomero told him to simply kill Dr. Man, stating he wasn't worth dying again. However, Fritz appeared shortly after to take man into custody, threatening to kill his associates Bomero and Fuller if they didn't release man. While Bomero appeared more afraid of the dying process, Fuller refused to relent, resulting in an exchange of gunfire. Fritz dragged the injured man away, patched up his wounds, and left him in a safe house with clean clothes, bathroom facilities, and a note explaining what had happened. Fritz's note told man that he'd left him a plane ticket to Toronto, encouraging him to travel there and to take out the critic, head of Are We Cool Yet?, one of Fritz's fellow conspirators. The administrator also left another updated version of the SCP-5555 file, this time detailing not SCPs that had been replaced, but members of Foundation staff. It also stated that 05-2 to 05-13 were all dead at Fritz's hand, leaving only Dr. Man, 05-1, as Fritz felt like they'd bonded. Reassuring the other leaders that he wasn't acting against them, Fritz explained through emails that he had shaped man into the perfect element for their game. Man departed for Toronto, assaulting the critic in an effort to gain more information, while also simultaneously carrying out Fritz's wishes. Dr. Everett Mann, for his part, continued to carry out Fritz's dirty work, tracking the various GOI leaders and replaced Foundation staff, determined to topple Fritz and his game once and for all. Come the start of the new game, Fritz and all his associates had switched roles with each other. The administrator of the Foundation took on the role of Dr. Wondertainment. Dr. Wondertainment became the Prophet of Mechane, a representative of the Church of the Broken God. The role of the Global Occult Coalition's DC Alphine became Jude Kairat, a member of the mischievous Gamers Against Weed group of interest. This new iteration of the game also assigned Dr. Man the role of Nobody. His win conditions for the game were to kill all the others, having himself been made one of them, an immortal by Fritz. Assembling his notes for the future 05 Council, Man set out on his hunt for Fritz, carrying with him a relentless grudge and signing off with a single item on a to-do list: kill Fritz. The story of SCP-5555 and the ongoing game that it relates to perhaps explains why we bury our dead. Sometimes uncovering them can reveal secrets that should never see the light of day. Some secrets, much like the dead, are best left buried. It was 1965, and the Chicago PD was investigating a meatpacking plant reported to be the home of a devil-worshipping cult, complete with allegations of human sacrifice. There, the cops were met with heavy resistance. A firefight broke out between the police and the occult worshippers who flooded out of the plant's basement. The cops were pinned down and in trouble, but they had a secret weapon, heavily armed and decked out in sophisticated ballistic armor and covered in strange insignia. Mobile Task Force Epsilon 9, also known as the Fire Eaters, here to assist the cops on behalf of the SCP Foundation. As always with the Foundation, they had no interest in some mere human cultists. Those were a dime a dozen in the world of anomalous monsters. What the Foundation had taken an interest in was who or what these cultists were worshipping. It all begun a few weeks back, near Danforth Meatpacking, an abandoned meatpacking plant just outside of Chicago. No one had given the place a thought in decades, that is, until people started going missing. Rumors spread of people being snatched in the surrounding woods by figures dressed in robes. Mysterious voices and noises were said to be coming out from the cavernous belly of the plant. Some even reported seeing smoke rising out of the building. Thick, black, noxious smoke. Something was terribly wrong here. Something was anomalous. The Chicago Police Department Strike Force, in association with the Fire Eaters from the Foundation, mobilized at Danforth Meatpacking. While the police were initially reluctant to work with these mysterious figures, they turned out to be indispensable for the raid. There were 47 cultists holding out in the basement of the plant, many of them heavily armed, and all of them hopped up on zealous devotion to their unknown master. All except one of the cultists fought to the death during a tense firefight with Chicago PD and the Fire Eaters. The single survivor was still heavily injured and was taken to a secure Foundation facility for emergency treatment and debriefing. Typically, the Foundation would need to perform extensive tests on the Danforth meatpacking plant to discover the source of the Anomalies' activity. However, this time, it was a Chicago detective who asked the question that busted the case wide open. The hell's with the giant pig? And while it would turn out to be a whole lot more than that, there was indeed a giant iron furnace shaped like a pig in the center of the facility. Measuring 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points, the thing was a behemoth. It had an internal furnace despite no apparent fuel source, and a 5-centimeter slot of unknown purpose on the side of the machine's immense rusted hide. Naturally, all the police officers involved in the raid had their memories wiped and restructured, and they were lucky, because they'd remain forever ignorant of the true horrors about to unfold in the confines of that godforsaken factory. As is standard procedure, the plant was isolated, and a Foundation research team, led by lead researcher Westron, under the authority of Regional Director Caleb, was installed on the new provisional site to conduct tests. Other than everyone feeling somewhat uneasy around it, this new anomaly, dubbed SCP-4511, didn't seem to exhibit any strange activities save for its perpetually burning fire. But during the initial research period, a small white card suddenly popped out of the slot in SCP-4511's side. A researcher carefully approached and looked at the card. There was writing. It said, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." Though nobody on the team had any idea what this meant. After going through a shootout with a considerable death toll to get to it, having a giant metal pig-shaped furnace spit out a cryptic card was strange. But at the secret medical facility where the surviving cultist was being held, things were about to get a whole lot stranger. As he lay in a bed suffering from his injuries, he pulled one of the medical staff close and uttered cryptic, dying words. "Give whatever it demands, or your suffering will be beyond measure." He expired seconds later, less than 72 hours after the raid. Back at the meatpacking plant, at the exact same time, another white card was produced by the machine, reading, "Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly churn. Period. 1 week." Perhaps this entity was a little more intelligent than they thought. A number of researchers on the team, invigorated by this new development, were eager to press forward with experiments. Lead researcher Westron, however, did not share their enthusiasm. Something about this entire situation felt like a grim omen to him. This entity had a plan far beyond their understanding, and on some deep animal level, he knew that helping this thing see its plans through would lead to disastrous results. On this first gut impulse, he denied the request for further experiments, but Regional Director Caleb had other ideas. Caleb overruled Westron's command, and the experiments began shortly after. The entity, jokingly nicknamed the Swine God by researchers, had made its demand. The metal teeth that endlessly churn. But what could that mean? It wasn't long before the entity began to produce more cards, each with their own strange and esoteric demands. However, on some instinctual level, the researchers at the site understood the demands perfectly. The next card's demand was, "The metal of this suffocating prison." Upon receiving this demand, researchers collected scrap metal from around the new site and tossed them into the furnace beyond the swine god's jaws one by one. Inside, they heard the sound of metal crunching. Hours later, all the other metal in the site began to rapidly oxidize and rust, though SCP-4511 itself remained unaffected. The card that came after delivered another simple request. "Oil to slicken my frozen joints." The researchers understood and procured 3 large barrels of oil and tossed them into the furnace. The entity let out a deep gurgle before shaking violently and expelling excess oil, rusted metal, and 2 domesticated pig femurs. It turns out that the swine god had an appetite for pigs, as the next card that rumbled out of the machine bore the request, "2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh." In response, the researchers provided the entity with 2 adult pigs. Just like the previous requests, they too were tossed into the fiery depths of the giant pig's mouth, from which came the horrible sounds of pigs squealing, and then a low, guttural gurgling. Next, the request was, "The hooks used to hang my children's corpses." To satisfy this request, the researchers provided 17 meat hooks. In response, 4511 spat out a metal sphere at an extremely high velocity, killing observing Foundation Agent McHenry. For reasons that weren't apparent at the time, rather than giving Agent McHenry a proper burial, his body was also fed into the hungry machine. Lead researcher Westron's concerns were mounting, but that didn't amount to much now. 4511 had developed a taste for flesh, and the researchers were all too eager to obey its command. On the swine god's order, it was fed a German shepherd. An hour later, the entity spat out some teeth, 6 of which came from a dog and 1 from a human. More than once, it released a card with a blunt request. "A worker for the line." The researchers knew exactly what this meant. It required a human sacrifice. SCP-4511 was given 2 D-Class personnel. 1 was flung back out seconds later, crunched and burned to death, with several internal organs missing. The other had a more mysterious and altogether upsetting fate. The second D-Class was heard screaming in the belly of the furnace for roughly 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a strange liquid was excreted by the machine. When the liquid was tested, they found trace amounts of chemicals like pig urine and motor oil, but most disturbing of all, human genetic material that was identical to that of lead researcher Westron. It seemed that the swine god had finally taken an interest in him. After some final requests for large quantities of coal and even human children to fuel its fires, it made a request that sent the whole thing crashing down. "The false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith." Lead researcher Westron knew what this meant. They all did. The swine god was demanding him in sacrifice. Lead researcher Westron tried to shut down the entire project, but the swine god was faster than him. One of his own researchers shot Westron in the leg, as the others gathered round and forcibly restrained him. He tried to reason with his subordinates, but it didn't do him any good. The swine god had crawled into all their minds and corrupted them. They were his servants now, and Westron was doomed. Despite his protests, the servants forced him into the mouth of SCP-4511, and after a little over 4 minutes of screaming, Westron was devoured just like all the other sacrifices. Upon receiving news of the horrors unfolding in the Danforth meatpacking plant, Regional Director Caleb declared the security of the site compromised and sent in Mobile Task Force Epsilon 11, aka the Nine-Tailed Fox. The 4 elite MTF soldiers were given the simple instruction to figure out exactly what had happened and to eliminate any potentially compromised Foundation staff members who'd fallen under the swine god's power. When the team arrived, they realized just how far gone the whole place was. Almost everyone was dead, having been sacrificed to the machine, and the ones that were left were completely insane. They attacked the task force, shouting in their madness about how no matter what the Foundation does to them, it would be nothing compared to what it would do. It had them all under its rusty iron foot. The team was forced to fend off repeated attacks from the pig's devotees, and even found the powers of the swine god starting to affect their own minds. The beast was more powerful and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The trained Foundation researchers and guards had been transformed into the same cultists they'd fought to gain control of the building by the mind-bending power of the swine god. The MTF were forced to retreat and return with reinforcements to truly clean the place out. Once a slaughterhouse, always a slaughterhouse. At this point, Regional Director Caleb took personal responsibility over the casualties, since he'd been the one who signed off on the experiments in the first place. He gave up his Regional Director rank and deemed himself the new lead researcher on the 4511 case. now that he fully understood the scope and danger of the entity they were dealing with. He wanted to lead the charge in discovering more about the anomaly, and hopefully someday negating its deadly effects. This may sound like a happy ending, in spite of all the violence, bloodshed, and human sacrifice that brought us here. But beware of the premature celebration. Despite investigation, the swine god retained no evidence of the objects, animals, and people it consumed and burned. Perhaps it burnt them down to their very atoms, if those even still existed. What we do know is that not long after lead researcher Caleb and his subordinates installed themselves into the facility, SCP-4511 produced one more little white card. It read, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." And if we've learned anything today, it's that the swine god gets whatever it demands. A brutal truth that lead researcher Caleb is likely to understand much sooner than he thought. Let's return to 2003, a time before YouTube. Yes, we know that's a frightening thought. We only ask that you take a deep breath and compose yourself so we can get through the rest of the story. While YouTube may not have been invented for another 2 years, the burgeoning internet of the early 2000s still wasn't without its content creators, posting everywhere from basic social media sites to personal GeoCities websites and specialty forums. One of these early proto-content creators was a man named John Cutler, better known at the time by his online handle, John Station. John Station was, tragically, a man operating before his time. His interests were firmly based on 3 things: mysteries, the paranormal, and urban exploration. If he'd been operating a mere decade later, he would have made a killing on urbex videos or scary 3 a.m. challenges. But instead, he was just sharing his urban exploration photos and videos with a small group of friends on various niche internet forums, like Parawatch, a premier destination for lovers of the strange and unusual online. Little did he know, an anomalous being he was about to encounter was an even more prolific internet user than him. But let's start from the beginning. John Station was making his way to the city of Detroit, Michigan on a Greyhound bus. Detroit had become somewhat of a holy land for dark tourists, photographers, and urban explorers. It'd once been one of the most valuable manufacturing hubs in the United States, the very heart of the automotive industry, until all of those manufacturing jobs were outsourced to other countries for cheaper labor. This, along with a number of other factors, led to a devastating economic collapse that the area is still suffering from today, along with a huge number of abandoned residential, commercial, and industrial buildings just waiting to be explored. And John Station planned to start off with a real staple of the urbex genre, a derelict warehouse. He was expecting to get some cool photos of disused machinery and maybe some cool graffiti left by anonymous street artists over the years. But what he certainly didn't expect was a series of 13 massive underground structures hidden below the warehouse. Something that looked like it would have taken decades to even excavate the room for, let alone actually build. The whole thing seemed like some kind of obscenely massive workshop. Strange machinery, shelves upon shelves of paper and notes, spare parts laying around everywhere. What had happened here? But as John Station continued his search into the bowels of this labyrinthine warehouse, he came upon the most strange and disquieting discovery of all: a large glass jar filled with green liquid and a perfectly preserved human brain floating inside. Of course, he took some pictures to share with his forumite buddies and got the hell out of Dodge. John Station had made what was, for any self-respecting Parawatch user, a terrible mistake. Because he was too busy listening to Avril Lavigne on his big, clunky early 2000s headphones, he didn't hear the brain's attempt to communicate with him.
"Oh, hello, young man. Are you here to see my marvelous inventions? Young man?"
But he was already gone by then. Little did John Station know, he just encountered one of the greatest human minds of his generation, Jeremy Valdez, an inventor without equal. And what's more, he may have actually encountered this singularly intelligent individual before. Thanks to Jeremy's brilliant foresight and the invention of a little something he called the V-Wave Universal Ansible, this disembodied brain was connected to the internet. What exactly was it doing with that internet connection? Everything from being a frequent forum poster to selling anomalous technology on the deep web. While we don't know much more than that about the brain's browsing habits, it goes without saying that we'd kill to see a copy of its internet history. When John Station returned home, he posted a picture of the brain to the internet, telling his fellow Urbex buddies to go and check the warehouse out. Naturally, this caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who saw a mysterious human brain hiding in a secretive underground structure in Detroit to be a certifiably anomalous development. And really, they didn't know the half of what they were about to get into. Welcome to the mind of Jeremy Valdez. After all the proper witnesses had been given amnestic treatment, the Foundation secured the warehouse and began exploratory missions into its bowels. It was exactly as John Station reported, a chaos of junk and shelves upon shelves of almost incomprehensible notes and diagrams. While agents searched for the brain of Jeremy Valdez, they encountered what would be later known as SCP-2099-B, his wondrous, anomalous creations. Most of these creations are robotic in nature, with some of them being known as peripherals, creations made specifically to help Valdez continue his research in his disembodied brain form. And they weren't exactly pleased about the Foundation intruding on Jeremy's extremely important research. They tried to defend his secret lair beneath the warehouse and were destroyed in the firefight with Foundation personnel. Only 5 peripherals are active now, which the Foundation uses as collateral in their deal with Valdez for his continued cooperation. To put it less politely, if he doesn't play ball, then the last of his peripheries get terminated. Thankfully for him and the Foundation operatives assigned to his case, Jeremy is a highly cooperative anomaly who has consistently behaved pleasantly towards Foundation staff. That's right, he's able to communicate directly with others by anomalous means. However, while having a direct line to the mind of this enigmatic ball of gray matter would seem like a dream to your typical researcher, the cooperation of Jeremy Valdez has been less valuable than the Foundation initially believed it would be. This is largely because Jeremy's mind appeared to be pretty similar to his workplace. Strange, chaotic, and hard to decipher. When they first asked who exactly he was, his response was,
I am the profound Professor V, the genius who invented the quantum pistol, the rocket to Sagittarius, the window to other worlds. My name is Jeremy Valdez. Jeremy. There was another Jeremy I met once. Well, lots, but the one stuck in my mind. Clever man, salesman. Can't trust them an inch if you give them a mile, but that wasn't me.
He's a little scatterbrained, to put it politely. Many of his answers, while strange and amusing, have been largely useless to the Foundation. For example, when they asked him how he was able to construct the secret facility, he said,
Oh, dug it all out. Tricky bit was the supports. Used solid Valdesium to hold it up. That's my own invention. Name, trademark, patent pending, unless I forgot to send in the application.
And when they asked how he was able to survive as a mere brain in a jar, he had the equally baffling and frustrating response,
Good diet and exercise, healthy living. Oh, and the electrolytes. It's in my notes somewhere, the whole process. Never will look at mashed potatoes the same way, I'll tell you that.
There may be at least some truth to that last one, as the solution inside Jeremy's jar has been tested and proven to be water mixed with electrolytes, sugars, green food coloring, and artificial flavoring. The current working theory on the green food coloring is simply that Jeremy thought it would make his disembodied brain look cooler. Jeremy truly proves that the lines between genius, madness, and outright buffoonery are far more malleable than any of us could have imagined. It's because of Jeremy's forgetfulness that he and his peripheries are such meticulous note-takers, though there is no discernible filing system for this absurd multitude of notes, and the majority of them are written in quick and scratchy shorthand that only Jeremy himself seems to be able to decipher. But of course, the most fascinating part of the story of Jeremy Valdez is his creations. So now we're going to take a better look at those inventions, and some of the stress that the Foundation has been going through in order to track the rest of them down. The peripheries are a varied bunch. Some are as simple as a pair of robot hands that endlessly take notes from Jeremy's unstoppable stream of consciousness. Some are as theatrical as humanoid robots dressed like butlers. We can't help but wonder how Mr. Deeds from SCP-662 would feel about this extra competition. However, the peripheries are really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Jeremy's overall body of work. Let's take a crash course through some of the peculiar inventions they discovered in Detroit. A pistol that fires out powerful X-rays, inexplicably powered by 2 ordinary AA batteries and focused via a non-anomalous quartz crystal. A 6-meter-tall humanoid robot constructed primarily from chrome and steel. A cannon that fires anomalous robot ninjas. No, that isn't a joke.
The cannon fires cartridges that anomalously break open, revealing human-sized robots wielding swords and nunchucks. A bin labeled cyborg parts, which was filled with a multitude of cybernetic prosthetic body parts, though none of these parts had any mechanisms that would allow them to interface with the human nervous system. But wait, there's more. A huge excavation vehicle with massive drills and claws that make the dirt it displaces disappear, perhaps explaining how Jeremy managed this little construction project. A rocket-based spacecraft with sediment stuck to its landing gear that indicates it's been on the moon at some point in the past. A force field generator so effective that the Foundation is still unable to penetrate it because Jeremy himself has, unsurprisingly, forgotten how to turn it off. A failed anti-gravity machine that instead just creates more gravity, meaning anything or anyone brought into its vicinity becomes twice as heavy as they would be under normal conditions of Earth gravity. In case you needed a little dose of existential terror today, there's also a complete working simulation of an entire alien solar system, somehow held on only 2 gigabytes of memory. And of course, we wouldn't be doing Jeremy Valdez justice if we didn't tell you how obsessed he is with lasers. The Foundation even found a large containment unit on the site, labeled 713 different laser guns, which contained, yep, you guessed it, 713 different laser guns. We imagine at least 1 or 2 of these ended up in Foundation Armory, or at least the personal office of Dr. Bright. Well, if they could only figure out how this absurd, ridiculous technology actually worked. The most challenging part of containing SCP-2099 isn't the brain itself, though the picture of Jeremy's brain is still circulating out on the internet today if you know where to look. It's finding and containing the anomalous items that Jeremy left laying around in his life before containment. Because Jeremy himself has a brain like a colander, even finding these items is largely a result of picking up clues from his bizarre ramblings, and thousands of pages of nigh incomprehensible notes he won't stop babbling on about. While trying to find one of Jeremy's items in an alley in Boston, Massachusetts, Foundation agents ran afoul of a group of Chaos Insurgency agents searching for the same thing. But this wouldn't be the last peculiar tie between Jeremy and certain groups of interest pitted against the Foundation. In a soup kitchen in Seattle, Washington, the Foundation found that Jeremy had once sold an enlarger ray to agents of the Mana Charitable Foundation, a surprisingly benevolent GOI who use anomalies to help the needy. They used the enlarger ray to enlarge food and fight against hunger in the city's homeless population. And while visiting an area in Boise, Idaho, after Jeremy once mentioned having customers there, the Foundation discovered substantial connections to a member of a Serpent's Hand cell. It seemed to all observers that Jeremy was a kind of anomalous Forrest Gump, a man who had somehow bungled his way through a series of unfortunate arrangements with several of the Foundation's greatest enemies. He's a brain with an awful lot of bad luck. Or is he? Because while the Foundation has bought his bumbling fool shtick hook, line, and sinker, that doesn't mean it's true. In fact, in a classified letter to a member of the Serpent's Hand that worked closely with him in the past, Jeremy presented a very different picture of himself.
Hey Al, I got your letter. Yeah, I'm not too worried about the Seco Pro. They're still digging at the old place. Psychology of the individual man. They're like cats. You run, they're going to chase you. But if they see something else moving, that's where their eyes are, leaving you to jet. The tail? Oh yeah, he's fine. He's designed for this stuff, man. And not like he's really there or anything. They get wise, we pull the plug and get away free and clear. Anyway, I got some new toys I came up with. Robots the size of fleas. They grab onto a guy, get carried wherever. They record what they see, hear, leave with whoever, and detach where you need them. No signal or trace, because they don't broadcast. You get it all when you collect them. I figure it'll be useful for that project of yours. I know, not your usual style, but get with the times, man. If you care to join me in the 22nd century, leave payment in the usual place. Ask Schiltz if you don't remember. And please, man, let me take a look at that hat. I just know I can make it better. You have goddamn lasers firing off your head. Think about it. V. So what do you think? Is Jeremy a bumbling brain in a jar? Or is that very brain a decoy for one of the most ingenious and deceptive masterminds in the anomalous world? An anomalous Kaiser Soze, always staying one step ahead of the Foundation while sending its agents on wild goose chases? Well, the fact we even need to ask shows that Jeremy Valdez is a few steps ahead of us already.
We're all familiar with viral diseases, especially over the past 2 years. The deadliness and severity of a virus cannot be understated. Whether it's COVID-19, influenza, or any other of the countless infectious diseases that plague humanity. We're all familiar with the bubonic plague, the Black Death which wiped out an estimated 25 million people in the Middle Ages, a third of Europe's population at the time. But that was during an era in which medieval advances were limited to the sickening practice of bloodletting, which drained a patient of their blood until all bacteria left their system, or washing the body with vinegar. Of course, none of these methods had any effect on staving off the Black Death, and the epidemic went down in history as one of the darkest periods of civilization. But for all our technological and medical advances in the field of health and medicine, infectious diseases are still as much of a threat now as they were back then, if not a greater one. Think about it. In today's world, everything is heavily connected. Globalization means that we travel more, import more products than ever before, and with such a high population density, it's difficult to keep anything under control due to the sheer amount of people there are in the world. Complete eradication of a viral disease has proven extremely difficult in even the strictest, most regimented campaigns to do so. Vaccines, while effective, still require time to develop, roll out, and treat. Take, for example, the smallpox virus. For centuries, this deadly disease slayed entire populations, killing millions with a mortality rate of 40%. In the 20th century, the world's governments and medical organizations worked tirelessly to come up with a vaccinated cure for the disease, and their efforts eventually paid off. A successful vaccine was developed, and only the trickling of cases of smallpox were documented in Somalia in the 1970s. Today, all that remains of the disease are contained samples held in high-security laboratories across the world, explicitly used for research purposes. But smallpox's story is not the norm. Other diseases you may not realize are still lurking in the shadows are polio and malaria. Polio being a disease affecting the central nervous system, with weakened muscle function as a result, and malaria being a mosquito-transmitted sickness that results in severe fevers and vomiting. The common perception is that these illnesses aren't actually a threat anymore, and are nothing more than a relic of the past, but that isn't quite true. While they've been eliminated from some parts of the world, in polio's case, most first-world countries such as the United States and Europe still have some documented cases that crop up from time to time. But the future is hopeful, with only under 50 cases of polio documented worldwide in the year 2018, and malaria's worldwide eradication program seeing success year by year. Maybe the world will one day be fully wiped of these terrible illnesses. But why are we telling you this during a video about the SCP Foundation? Because the subject of today's video is also a deadly virus, but unlike the most ordinary variations we just discussed, this one is going to be a lot more difficult to eradicate fully. And by difficult, we mean next to impossible. As to be expected with an organization like the SCP Foundation, the threats they deal with are both similar to the ones the rest of the world's governments and large organizations do, and entirely, completely different. If you're a seasoned viewer of SCP Explained, chances are you are already familiar with more than a few anomalous viruses. They're unspeakably deadly, incredibly strange, and can put an infected victim through more pain and suffering than anything else in the world. It's a testament to the Foundation's thoroughness and capabilities that some of these diseases are even able to be concentrated in a manageable dose and contained inside a chamber at a secure facility. But for others, they're still out there, ready to strike at a moment's notice, and there's absolutely nothing the Foundation can do about it, except be as swift as possible in their retaliation. And there's no doubt that they're prepared. With the deadliness of an anomalous virus, which can spread at a more infectious rate and potentially alert the rest of the world to the supernatural happenings of the SCP Foundation and the objects they contain, an anomalous pandemic is one of the Foundation's greatest fears. Some anomalous diseases, as we mentioned before, are under the control of the Foundation. Take SCP-008, nicknamed the Zombie Plague, for example. SCP-008 is a deadly virus that, you guessed it, can essentially turn a patient into a zombie, reanimating their corpse after the sickness kills them. What makes SCP-008 unique is that it's entirely absent from the natural world, save for the places the Foundation has labeled G2 sites. These G2 sites are small pockets across the world in which the Foundation discovered SCP-008, which further research of such have determined that the disease may not have originated on Earth in the first place. Subjects infected by SCP-008 display symptoms within 3 hours of infection, which include flu-like symptoms, preceded by a coma, which is followed by death. But after death, the victim's body will continue to display lifeless signs of mortality, including a high durability to damage and a desire to ingest living humans on physical contact, just like a zombie. Research into SCP-008 is highly classified and left out from the original document because the Foundation has the right to fear that SCP-008 may be replicated in an unsuspecting laboratory one day. As such, containment efforts to prevent such research from bearing fruit are in place, backed by the Foundation's stranglehold over the ordinary scientific world. Thankfully, SCP-008 has mostly been destroyed, with samples contained solely at the G2 sites, which are now protected Foundation facilities located across the world. But the Foundation was lucky that SCP-008 was so easily contained. If the disease spread in larger numbers or originated from a natural source on Earth, we might be living in a world more like a zombie apocalypse movie than the one we know today. On the other side of the spectrum, you have SCP-3519, the Quiet Days virus. In one reality, SCP-3519 managed to kill off the entire world due to its severity and ease of infection. Unlike most anomalous diseases, SCP-3519 was a mimetic virus, meaning that its transmission wasn't just limited to the traditional means of physical contact, but the very idea of it permeating your mind would allow it to take root inside your body. SCP-3519 permeated the idea that the world would end on March 5, 2019, and that self-termination was a preferable option than living through the apocalypse and the terrible aftermath that would follow. SCP-3519 took society by storm, and the idea was transmitted through television broadcasts and news stories encouraging people to free themselves from the world, and even Foundation sites themselves. The Foundation was powerless, and the rapid rate of transmission proved too difficult for the organization to keep fully under control. The project to create a cure was greenlit, but one by one, as Foundation sites across the globe suffered massive die-offs and a loss of personnel, the research team dwindled down until there was only one person left, a junior researcher by the name of Rory Jones, who assumed the position of 05-6 in an emergency succession protocol that would promote the next highest member of the Foundation to the position in the event of an overseer dying. Jones was the only member of the Foundation left, and as far as he knew, camped up in a cabin in the woods with nothing but a few research materials and a computer terminal, the only man alive. The SCP-3519 timeline's story proves just how quickly a deadly anomalous virus can get out of control. How it can make an organization as all-powerful and ever-prepared as the SCP Foundation just another statistic in a record of infected populations. But you don't need to tell the Foundation that. They're already well aware, and they've had decades to prepare, study, and analyze the effect an anomalous virus can have on the world. And that brings us to the mysterious case of the main anomaly we'll be looking at today, SCP-277, the Clockwork virus. Dr. Charles Gears, a researcher of note that you may have heard of before, was one of the Foundation's best and brightest. His cold, distant demeanor and propensity for researching the anomalous commonly associated with a divergent religion, the Church of the Broken God, a group of zealots focused on reassembling the broken metal pieces of their mechanical, technological god, made onlookers associate the Gears name with sleek, careless alloys and methodical, cold clockwork. When the Foundation began observing symptoms of what would later be labeled SCP-217 in a major population center, whose name would be scrubbed from all official documents, they knew Dr. Gears was the right man to head the research efforts. For years, the Foundation had observed strange medical records and reports from the city. Reports of dementia in subjects younger than the common age brackets and at uncommonly high rates. High reports of lethargy, depression, emotional dulling, and a feeling of something moving underneath the skin or a ticking noise in the ear were all signs that the Foundation was dealing with SCP-217. Dr. Gears was already familiar with the disease, having worked alongside efforts to study it in the past. This was not the first major population area affected by SCP-217, and there surely were more areas up next. Upon arriving and reading the initial reports, Dr. Gears requested to view a subject that the Foundation believed was suffering from SCP-217. When the young woman entered, Gears immediately recognized the signs, the stiff movements, the robotic, monotone voice, and the way that nothing he seemed to say fazed her. They were all clear-cut signs of SCP-217's infection. The girl was barely high school age, but she looked like she had all of her youth and life zapped out of her completely. It was a horrible sight to see. An X-ray was performed, and Gears saw for himself a definitive sign that SCP-217 had taken over her body. The X-ray imagery showed the inside of the girl's body, which had been converted from an ordinary mass of organs and tissues into a clockwork machine, composed of cogs, gears, screws, and wires. And as Gears knew, this would only get worse as time went on, with signs of her infection appearing outside the body as well as inside. Right now, there wasn't a shred of human tissue left inside her, and there was nothing the doctor could do about it. Gears thought about the girl's family, who had been anesthetized prior to the Foundation seizing their daughter for research purposes. And though the emotionless man would never let his facade down, his heart ached for her. But it wasn't only her. It was dozens of people inside the city the Foundation had documented as displaying symptoms of SCP-217. On a scale this high, there was little the Foundation could do except sit back, watch, and only act when the symptoms became too visible to hide. That was the tragedy of SCP-217, the Clockwork virus. It wasn't deadly, but it was a slow, more metaphorical death, from a person made of flesh and blood to a clockwork automaton that felt more like a shell than a living thing. The Foundation was more than familiar with SCP-217 though, and multiple samples are held inside a reverse-pressure airlocked containment chamber at a high-security site for research purposes, in hopes that one day, a cure could be developed. Personnel wanting to access SCP-217 samples have to don fully insulated hazmat suits, with chemical sterilization and endure a post-interaction quarantine period, with physical testing. All this being mandatory after they have finished their experiments with the virus. The severity of an SCP-217 infection cannot be understated, and any items touched by infected personnel have to undergo a strict sterilization process. The Foundation is perfectly justified in this overly cautious behavior too, because SCP-217 has an infection rate of 100%, meaning that it will transmit through physical contact all of the time without failure. But it doesn't just infect humans. The Clockwork virus has been observed to infect all multicellular organisms. From the smallest insect to an elephant, SCP-217 consumes and hollows out all it can. Clockwork beings wrought from a clockwork virus, marching to the ticking of their innards in a hollow, empty world. If that sounds terrifying and like a nightmare, then congratulations. Chances are you're unaffected by SCP-217. If it sounds appealing, well, you might just be a mechanite ready to serve the Church of the Broken God, but we'll get to that connection later. SCP-217 is especially difficult to deal with due to its hardiness. It can survive for years outside a host body, and when it does find a suitable host, and trust us, there's no shortage in supply of them in the world, it can sometimes take years for symptoms of SCP-217 to manifest. It's a slow virus, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. The Foundation might not realize a large population area has been infected before it's too late, and that's exactly what happened before, with entire towns being infected by SCP-217. But what are those symptoms? Well, you might have already been able to guess so far that SCP-217 has to do with turning someone into a mechanical monstrosity. But there's a bit more to it than that. SCP-217 alters biochemistry in such a way that it causes organic matter to rearrange itself into an organic metal. Chemical scans of this metal reveal that there's still living cellular tissue and DNA present inside it, but it takes the appearance and feels indistinguishable from actual materials. This process occurs slowly over time, and advanced stages have shown that a subject's interior will resemble a machine, with a complicated mixture of gears and clockwork. This is subtle, barely noticed by the patient at first, with only vague feelings of confusion, insomnia, and joint stiffness. But as larger and larger parts of the body are converted, the subject experiences extreme pain. As Dr. Gears wrote in his research notes on SCP-217,
Hearts are replaced by gears and small tubes, joints by gear networks, eyes by structures not unlike primitive hand-crank film cameras, etc.
SCP-217 in non-mammals shows first on the outside of the body. In mammals such as humans, SCP-217 converts the internals before being visible on the outside of the body. The reason for this is unknown, but it might have something to do with that broken god connection we mentioned earlier. One of the Church's core beliefs focuses on ascending humanity to reflect Mechane, the broken god. While the origins of SCP-217 are unknown, if the virus is related to the Mechanites, this subtle, slow infection may be a part of their grand design, a plan to covertly infiltrate society and convert the masses into effigies of their god. But of course, this is all speculation. As we mentioned, those infected by SCP-217 can be entirely unaware of their conversion until it's too late. But aside from physicality, the mental state is also affected. From the middle to advanced stages of SCP-217 infection, victims' behaviors reflect their cold, mechanical insides. They respond in a repetitive, disassociated fashion. Their actions are dull, mechanical, and telegraphed. They're easily distracted and confused, and appear irritable when faced with new problems. In the early stages, SCP-217 manifests as increased lethargy, a lack of emotional response, and a feeling of fluttering or moving underneath the skin. Always present are ticking noises, like those of a clock, that mainly manifest when SCP-217 infects the shoulders, neck, and head. But attempts to hear this noise using recording equipment have invariably failed, as the device will not pick up any sound if pressed against an affected area. As SCP-217's infection advances, the subject will experience excruciating pain, sharp, tearing sensations in the areas that are being converted into organic metal, comparable in feeling to a knife wound or a deep muscle tear. This feeling can persist for hours or days, depending on which area of the body is being affected and the subject themselves. After tearing the existing organs, the new parts will integrate into the tissue and settle into the body, producing pain. An analysis of this newly formed organic metal appears to be alloys of brass, steel, and iron varieties, but substances such as leather, rubber, glass, and wood have been observed. And observed is the key word, because as soon as these materials are examined deeper, it's revealed that they're still organic in composition, and even carry the subject's DNA. Organs and tissues affected will, however, become stronger. Instead of being squishy meat bags filled with tissue, blood, and other parts, they take on the physical properties, namely durability, of the material they resemble. If one of these areas are damaged, they'll repair over time just like regular organs, but at a much slower rate. But one interesting note is that a damaged piece of organic metal can be repaired, so to speak, by replacing damaged areas with new parts of the same type. This has had no consequences, and the body will continue to act as normal. That's one benefit of being infected by SCP-217. You can essentially repair yourself with whatever you have access to. But the conversion of a victim doesn't stop. It continues to occur until their entire body is organic metal, inside and out. Dr. Gears's research on a fully converted brain was apparently so groundbreaking that it had to be erased from the standard security class documentation. We can only speculate on what it contained. Possibly that connection to the broken god that we're so desperate to make? We don't know. But whatever it was, it hinted at something far larger than what a cursory look at SCP-217 seems to suggest. SCP-217 is truly one of the most dangerous anomalous viruses the Foundation has to deal with, having already infected hundreds of people in various population centers around the world, before containment methods can be properly established. So if you happen to start hearing the sounds of a tick here and a talk there, accompanied by a strange fluttering feeling under your skin, we're sorry to say, there's not much we can do for you now. Actually, nothing. There's nothing we can do. Salvation, Indiana was your typical Midwestern American town. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where everyone was comfortable leaving their doors unlocked at night, where there was a sense of trust between neighbors that you couldn't find in a more populated area. The kind of place where word traveled fast, and where people talked about things that were improper in hushed voices behind the backs of others. In Salvation, being an outsider or deviating from the norm was akin to complete isolation.
You either fit in or you got out. And if you didn't, Salvation had its ways of making you conform to the mold. Gossip, organized stalking efforts, discrimination. These small-town methods were often employed by the town's inner circle to keep those who they had a distaste for in check. And unfortunately, this cliquish mentality can be the norm when it comes to small towns. There's nothing anomalous about the ugliness of human nature. But Salvation did have its secrets, the kind that, if brought to light, would tear a small town apart. The kind that attracted the attention of the US government's Unusual Incidents Unit, a branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that dealt with the paranormal and supernatural, the US government's answer to the SCP Foundation. Between June 18th and June 23rd, 1976, the town of Salvation, Indiana underwent swaths of extreme anomalous activity that affected the town's entire population, but was mainly centered around Salvation's high school, appropriately named, well, Salvation High School. 2 UIU agents were dispatched to Salvation to assess the reports of anomalous activity, record it, and of course help cover it up. This was one of the few times the UIU got the jump on an anomalous incident before a larger, more prominent organization such as the SCP Foundation or the Global Occult Coalition. Bet they got a company pizza party for that one. The operation went smoothly, with the agents using an early amnestic labeled Chemical 110 to wipe the memories of the townsfolk after interviewing them. Although in later years, study of Chemical 110 would prove it to be incredibly dangerous, as the amnestic was both toxic and had a degrading, damaging effect on human memory centers. Between this and the Foundation's early amnestic models also proving to be incredibly dangerous, the 1970s were an interesting time indeed in the field of supernatural cover-up operations. The timeline of events the agents established depicted an eerie scene. It was only a few days, but what occurred was both horrifying and strange. On Sunday night, 10th grade students at Salvation High School reported hearing what they described as someone trying to speak under the ground while passing by the school on their way home from a church service. One student reported it to her mother, who ignored it entirely. On Monday, an 11th grade student of Salvation High School claimed during gym class that he could hear voices coming from underneath the school's pool. Several other students corroborated this story. When school officials came to investigate, they didn't find anything unusual, but the UIU agents found that the lining of the bottom of the pool was cracked. On the same day, several female students reported seeing faceless things instead of their own reflections in a bathroom mirror. They did not seem bothered by this. During lunch announcements, many students described being able to hear a third voice alongside the 2 other students speaking unintelligibly below the broadcast. Curiously, the agents found that the PA room, where the broadcast originated from, sat in a media center near the pool. On Tuesday, students arriving at school noticed that the Indiana state flag was more than 3 meters above the top of the flagpole, attached to nothing, just floating. The American flag was not found, and more importantly, the students claimed they could see 9 female figures hanging by ropes from the flagpole, who disappeared immediately after being seen. During a biology class, one student suddenly stood up and rolled their eyes to the back of their head. They descended suddenly into the floor and disappeared entirely. Shortly after, they reappeared above a ceiling panel in the center of the room. No other students were able to identify the student, and several of their classmates insisted that their actions were just a joke. The UIU agents were unable to find proof of the student's existence in Salvation's enrollment records. Similarly, students described yet another student they didn't recognize walking the halls of the high school. They were unable to define any details of their appearance, save for one thing that stood out. They wore a purple satchel with the word syncope embroidered on the side. A custodian reported seeing something staring at him, standing at the bottom of the school pool. On Wednesday, the horror only sped up, as school staff noted that there was a full 2 inches of water across all levels of the school. For whatever reason, the school's principal decided not to close the school. At 7:56 a.m., the entirety of the student body heard an unknown voice whisper the word "hello" in their right ear. Members of the school band realized their instruments no longer produced any sound, but whenever they played, they reported seeing a small black human-shaped entity flickering in and out of view in the corner of the room, facing the wall. One student saw a dark figure walking up and away from the school through the air at an impossible angle. Eventually, the figure disappeared from her sight and was never seen again. No other student addressed this. On Thursday, a student in gym class avoided a dodgeball as it phased through his body. He sunk into the floor screaming for help. Nobody who noticed seemed motivated enough to help him. The entire school shifted roughly 1 foot off of its foundations at 11 a.m. The vice principal, who was sent to inspect the building's integrity, described seeing something small with too many faces grinning at him from underneath the building before the school inexplicably resettled back to its original position. The boys' locker rooms disappeared and were replaced with what witnesses described as something that screamed. They were unable to provide any details. As students left for the day, they saw 9 young women hanging in the air, tilted forward at an angle above the school's parking lot. They could be silently mouthing words, and their appearances were described by witnesses as ugly and unremarkable. They vanished, and again the majority of the town residents reported hearing a child's voice say the word hello below them upon the figure's disappearance. A panic ensued, as town officials had no explanation for these events. Salvation's principal made the call to close the school on Friday. However, when Friday morning arrived, the entire student body showed up for school. The building was locked, so the students simply waited outside to be let in. No individuals could describe why they were there. There was a knock on a window, and the students saw a small black entity standing outside of a second-story classroom. An entity phased in and out of the school's windows over and over until suddenly disappearing. After this, the front door unlocked itself, and the mass gathering of students entered the building. However, what they found was unlike the small school they had come to know over the years. Inside, Salvation High School was transformed into a non-Euclidean space, meaning that reality didn't work inside it the way it should. Hallways that led right instead led downward. Stairs that went up instead curved left. As the students moved through the school, they couldn't help but feel like they were always moving down, lower and lower. Some heard whispers, others heard drums in the distance. As they approached the basement, they saw a massive stone archway. Suddenly, the students shifted, encasing the entire group in rock and earth for 20 seconds. After this brief, suffocating torture ended, the students reappeared back in the school, except this time, every one of them reported being the only one in the building. They described the experience wandering the building alone before coming to what they called a doorway below a doorway, and ended up inside a small sub-basement room. There they saw 3 mysterious visions. A woman crouched over a body of water, surrounded and covered in blood. A farmhouse and a group of trees that were burning. 9 white humanoid figures floating in the air overhead. A weeping woman digging in a field until her hands began to rot and fall apart. When these visions subsided, the black entity reappeared again. It whispered hello, and the group of students were suddenly surrounded by 9 screaming female figures. After this, the students reappeared inside their own homes. It was at this point that the UIU began to enter the town to distribute amnestics to the subjects. More anomalous activity was recorded in rapid succession. Bodies hanging in the sky, water taps leaking human hair and mucus instead of water. Individuals reported that their facial features had disappeared entirely. Others reported seeing faceless creatures in the town. The black entity frantically appearing and reappearing in rapid succession throughout the town. Even a weeping young woman running back into the school's building, who witnesses lost after she entered the school's basement. The cover-up effort was brutal, but it worked. The townspeople of Salvation were convinced that they saw hallucinations as a result of toxic gases blown south from a factory up north. But what was the connection between all the phenomena? 9 faceless female entities, water, and blood. Something that literally upsets the entire foundation of Salvation High School. A small black entity. Adults in the town ignoring the things their children saw and acting indifferent toward them. All this sounds a lot like a dirty, dark secret being unearthed in the town of Salvation. Something people would rather turn a blind eye to and ignore. But they couldn't, because the terror was only getting started. A week after these events occurred, contractors assessing the damage to the school discovered the sub-basement room, where the students had various visions of anomalous entities. Behind it was the entrance that led to the large stone archway. This antechamber was discovered after one of the members of the contracting team slipped and fell beneath a collapsed section of wall and floor that led to the massive area underneath the school. The contracting team attempted to extract them, but they did not succeed. Their disappearance caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who assessed the school and deemed the area beneath the school to be anomalous, as the building's architecture should not be able to accommodate the size of the area. It was designated SCP-3935, and as the Foundation began investigating it, they were determined to uncover the truth of what really was occurring in Salvation, Indiana. While exploring SCP-3935, they came across the stone archway, a piece of architecture whose origins are unknown. Inscribed on the arch was a phrase that read,
"The way below winds deeper, longer, unspeakable its patterns laid. The lost forever damned to wander, this thing a quiet madness made."
After the initial establishment of SCP-3935 as an anomalous location, the Foundation poured deeper into Salvation's mystery and came across the documents created by the UIU agents. The Foundation, being much more thorough in their containment methods than the UIU, decided that the small town of 1,400 people was easy enough to relocate entirely, and the entire area could be condemned, feeding into the excuse of a hazardous waste facility nearby, leaking noxious gases into the town's water and air supply. With the townsfolk successfully relocated, Salvation was quarantined and cut off from the rest of the world. Roads were removed and rerouted, and Foundation personnel turned over any trespassers to local authorities. Salvation High School became a hub for Foundation researchers studying SCP-3935 and the events that occurred in the town, and the building was heavily guarded when not in use by the organization. The initial exploration attempt into SCP-3935 was conducted by a team of Foundation agents, shortly after members of the contracting team were lost. There was a slight hope they could be recovered, and the effort was dubbed a search and rescue mission. 3 agents, Ellis, Porter, and Haskell, were tasked with entering SCP-3935, all equipped with recording equipment and a shoulder-mounted lamp system. They entered a cramped, narrow space beyond the archway, where the subterranean stone walls got tighter and tighter, and the air felt stuffy and uneasy. On the walls, images resembling a child's drawings were carved into the rock. As the teams continued to push through the rock tunnel, they found it difficult to breathe. The walls were getting narrower, too close for comfort. Suddenly, Porter's voice cut out, and his camera feed went black. When it came back, it appeared to be looking up at 2 sources of light, most likely the other 2 agents' lamps, as Porter fell from a great distance. His screaming was heard on both the cameras and by the other agents, but they couldn't figure out where he was. Ellis and Haskell began to panic, moving faster and attempting to struggle forward. The rock tunnel was so tight, so constraining, that they were unable to move more than a few steps in a second. After a short period of time, both men fell forward into a larger open space. As they searched for Porter, who wasn't behind them, they came to the conclusion that he must have fallen into a ravine or slipped beneath the rocks. There was no other explanation for how he disappeared so suddenly, but their talk was cut short when they realized what was in front of them. They hadn't noticed it at first, but when they turned their lamps forward, they noticed a gigantic structure, seemingly carved out of stone. It resembled Salvation High School almost perfectly. The main entrance was visible, and the windows too, a stone replica of the school, hidden in this massive underground area. The agents couldn't believe it. There was a thick layer of fog in front of them, but they could make out a narrow stone bridge that extended across a large chasm, leading to the stone replica of the school. As they examined further, they noticed that underneath the school was another model of the school, and under that one was another. It went on indefinitely, extending deeper and deeper into the ground, in the direction that all things in Salvation seemed to go, down. On the other side of the bridge, hanging mid-air, were 9 female entities, their faces obscured by long white hair. The 2 agents stood still in fear. After a short time, the figures appeared 10 meters backwards, and then another 10, and then they appeared right in front of the door of the stone school structure. Slowly, they lifted their heads, revealing their featureless faces to the agents, who recoiled in fear. After that, they disappeared. The two agents debated going back for reinforcements, but they pushed onward after hearing the sudden sound of many voices speaking in hushed tones in the distance. It could have been the lost contractors, or their lost man, Porter. They entered the stone school and began searching. Inside, they couldn't make heads or tails of the architecture. As they ran down the hallways, following the sound of the voices, they noticed that the halls seemed to stretch on forever, but they didn't seem to notice the watching, featureless faces who observed the agents from the window panes in the doorways. As the agents came to the auditorium doorway, Agent Haskell let out a scream, and his voice recorder disconnected. At this point, what occurred became nearly impossible to make out on the Foundation's recording. The voices grew louder. Haskell's camera shifted perspective to the floor. 9 female entities appeared around Agent Ellis, contorting their bodies into impossible positions. Haskell ran, but the entities pursued him. He screamed for help. Eventually, the figures hung in the air, unmoving. Haskell slowed down too and slowly turned around, coming face to face with a small black humanoid entity sitting upside down on the ceiling of the hallway. It whispered one word, "Hello." The feed cut out to the choppy sounds of audio distortion. A snapping noise was heard, and then silence. And then all 3 agents' feeds returned. For the duration of the exploration recording, Haskell, Ellis, and Porter lost their minds in the depths of SCP-3935. In between periods of silence, they laughed, screamed, and shouted incoherently, rambling on about how dark it is and how they can't go down any further, below, where it goes on forever, where they can be part of the 9, be a part of salvation, where they can fall forever. And after that, silence. The feed was cut out completely, and neither the trio nor the contractors were ever recovered. After this failed, horrifying exploration attempt, more anomalous activity occurred in the town during the Foundation's occupation. Sightings of the 9 faceless entities in the streets and the trees. An agent who saw the black figure constantly in his peripheral vision. Sounds coming from a grove of trees near the school, which led to a cabin and 9 corpses of former Salvation High School students in the backyard. But before they could investigate, the female entities appeared once more, and they were unable to locate the grove again. The Foundation's investigation of Salvation continued through the decades, interviewing former staff members of the school and residents. They were trying to piece together any semblance of a coherent story, to find a way to connect all these dissonant elements into something understandable. The black figure, the corpses, the buried secrets, and the 9 female entities. How did it all connect to the school? In 2002, a Foundation agent interviewed Mrs. Fletcher, an English teacher at Salvation High School during the period of anomalous activity in 1976. The interview started out ordinarily enough. Fletcher, in her old age, couldn't remember much. She remembered the town was quiet, with a tight-knit community. They didn't even need a police force because there was so little crime. She remembered students would go into the woods and chase ghosts, or claim they saw things, but it was never anything too strange. But as Fletcher continued to talk, she let her mind wander more and more. She recounted how there was a disappearance at the high school, a girl who was last seen by the school's pool. The town assumed she ran away. After all, there were some individuals who held strong opinions in Salvation, the kind of opinions that didn't sit right with some of the younger residents. The church was important in Salvation. Nearly everyone went. Fletcher opened up some more. There was a scandal, she recalled. A teenage girl on the school cheer team who ended up pregnant out of wedlock. She couldn't recall her name or what she looked like, but she remembered the town's inner circle was in an uproar about it. She didn't want them to know. She didn't want anyone to know. It was a secret she could barely keep from spreading. It must have been destroying her, Fletcher explained. She couldn't remember much about the girl, but she did remember that the girl would always say hello to her. Too many times, in fact. Eventually, the girl was found hanging in the woods, right outside of a log cabin. They found a note in her hand, which contained a drawing of a building that resembled the high school, and on its back, the repetition of the same word over and over again. But Fletcher couldn't recall what the word was. The Foundation agent was about to close the interview out, but he had one last thing to ask. He produced a picture of the unidentified 9 female figures that were haunting the town and showed it to Fletcher. She became noticeably pale and short of breath. "Do you know anything about this, Mrs. Fletcher?" the agent said. She collected herself and examined the image as best as she could, her hand shaking.
Yes, I do. Those are, the cheerleaders. They were, well, let me think. There were 10 of them, though, I think. Unless something happened to one of them, there were definitely 10.
The Foundation didn't have to ask what happened to the 10th.
Foundation researcher Marcus Hernandez was a professional in all aspects of his job. He was intelligent, being scouted for a job at the Foundation right out of college. He was brave, unyielding in the faces of the horrifying creatures and dangerous situations that working with the Anomalies practically guaranteed. But most importantly, researcher Hernandez was cautious. He not only knew that keeping his hands at a fair distance from any newly discovered anomalous objects was a safe way to keep his head, he was also aware that it was sometimes better to take risks that would further his knowledge about an anomaly and how best to contain it. Sometimes those risks came with a price, like being part of the first team to study a recently discovered anomaly. To researcher Hernandez, it was better to lose the lives of the ones working to protect humanity from what lies in the dark than have any unsuspecting civilians stumble upon something potentially life-threatening. That's why he and his team took the assignment of studying SCP-1437 before anyone else in the Foundation was able to. They simply were not sure of what it was capable of, and researcher Hernandez's known attention to detail and cautious nature could best help the Foundation not only establish proper containment procedures, but also ensure that their own personnel were safe while doing so. As researcher Hernandez sat in the back of a jeep that rolled and tumbled over the arid landscape of the Mojave Desert, he reviewed what the Foundation knew about the anomaly. Unfortunately, it wasn't much. For starters, it was a 3-meter by 3-meter hole in the ground, originally thought to be an ordinary cave. As a result of its deceiving appearance, the anomaly went unnoticed for decades, until the Foundation picked up on a local story that was the talk of the town for a small group of camping and hiking hobbyists in Nevada. A camper, while out exploring and trekking through the dry dunes of the Mojave, was struck in the back of the neck with a U.S. quarter. While the object by itself is harmless, it came flying at the camper's body at an incredibly high speed, shooting from a large hole in the ground and striking hard enough to break the skin and wedge itself inside the camper's neck. After reaching the local hospital and getting the coin removed, it still left a small scar across the back of the camper's head. This unusual event prompted Foundation reconnaissance, which turned out to be entirely warranted, as observation of the surrounding area found several more objects buried around the area that were believed to have emerged from the hole, now designated as SCP-1437. A small canoe decorated with luminescent patterns, a calculator that added and subtracted letters instead of numbers, and a rotten apple core were all objects strewn around the immediate area. And if that's not strange enough, attempts to map out the hole failed, as all measuring equipment was lost after reaching a certain depth. Before the initial observation team picked up and left, SCP-1437 shot out large quantities of rock and dirt for over an hour, confirming that objects emerged from the hole at high speeds. Chemical analysis of the objects found around the area showed that they were composed of materials either unknown or not commonly found on Earth to warrant use in mass production. The observation team came up with a hypothesis. SCP-1437 was a hole that led to a parallel universe, and the objects it shot out originated in said location. Researcher Hernandez knew that this was just a hypothesis, but he had reviewed the lab results himself. Those objects certainly did not come from anywhere on Earth, and if the hole functioned as a gateway between worlds, that could explain why the measuring equipment was lost after a certain point. The jeep came to a stop, and when researcher Hernandez stepped out, he came face to face with SCP-1437, a large hole sitting in the Mojave Desert. His crew was already hard at work, surveying and excavating the surrounding area for any other objects the hole had shot out that had been lost to time. A mobile analysis lab tent was set up in the distance, as well as several trailers for personnel living on site. Researcher Hernandez's personal decision to not use D-Class personnel in his research meant that each risk the SCP-1437 team took had to be calculated differently. They wouldn't send a person into the hole and risk loss of life when a drone could serve the same function without the potential drawbacks. But still, the initial observation team lost all of their equipment while trying to measure SCP-1437's depth. Why waste an expensive drone when the result would most likely turn out the same? It was these decisions that earned Hernandez's fame and respect at the Foundation, and over the next few weeks, his team was able to develop a wide knowledge base regarding SCP-1437 and establish safe containment procedures to keep the anomaly hidden from the public and easy to work with for Foundation personnel. First, a 2-meter-tall electric fencing unit was built around the perimeter of SCP-1437. This fence would not only keep unwanted trespassers out, but also had defensive capabilities due to the harmful electrical charge it could emit upon contact with an object. Groups of 3 security guard personnel were assigned to patrol this fence at all times, and they were instructed to deal with any trespassers through standard Foundation protocol. They would be taken into custody, interrogated, and as long as they were unaware of SCP-1437's anomalous properties, given a healthy dose of amnestics and released back into the general public. Anything that emerged from SCP-1437, be it a physical object or a living organism, would be cataloged by the Foundation and tested immediately for any potential hazards before further analysis could begin. If found to be safe, the items would be studied as much as possible. If not, they were stowed away in an area intended to keep them contained until a safe way to examine them was found. But perhaps the most important containment procedure researcher Hernandez established was the forbiddance of testing with SCP-1437. Due to the anomaly's mysterious nature and incredibly likely potential connection to parallel universes, testing could have grave and unforeseen consequences. When dealing with alternate or parallel timelines or realities, the Foundation is incredibly cautious and only interacts in ways that they're absolutely sure will not have any unexpected damage on baseline reality. That, and researcher Hernandez wasn't exactly keen on attracting the attention of these parallel universes without a solid understanding of who and what they were. As he would come to find, this inclination proved to be beneficial. As the team observed SCP-1437, they documented a number of notable objects that emerged from the hull, each supposedly originating from a parallel world. The first of which, however, was not anything the team hadn't seen before. The initial observation team sent to test whether SCP-1437 was actually anomalous had observed the hull emitting a mass of rock and dirt. For over an hour, SCP-1437 spewed earth and materials without stopping, filling the surrounding areas with debris. Since this was before the research team theorized the hull was connected to parallel realities, they weren't sure what to make of it. Was it a natural eruption? A poorly documented earthquake that somehow sent chunks of rock and dirt to the surface and shooting out of the hole? Though somewhat stumped, researcher Hernandez's team eventually came to a single solid conclusion. If SCP-1437 led to a parallel world or worlds, whoever was on the other side of the hole may have been attempting to fill it using natural materials. If they were attempting to fill it, could they be trying to contain it? Did the parallel world on the other side of SCP-1437 have its own foundation? This sudden thought gave researcher Hernandez pause and made him reconsider his hands-off approach to SCP-1437. Should his team attempt to contact whoever was on the other side? If it was a parallel branch of the Foundation, this behavior would be encouraged. The Foundation communicated with alternate versions of itself in time and space all of the time. The Department of Temporal Anomalies was built around this premise, but these were exceptions, not the rules. And communication with alternate foundations was always carried out with utmost safety and precaution. It was only done when there was a certainty that risk would be avoided. Researcher Hernandez was sure he made the correct decision, and he would stray away from attempting to contact those on the other side of the anomaly, even if they were another world's incarnation of the SCP Foundation. Weeks later, researcher Hernandez was awoken in the middle of the night by an excited assistant who, after calming herself down, informed him that SCP-1437 had spat out a new object. You have to forgive her if you were out in the desert for weeks staring at a hole waiting for it to do something and it eventually did it, you'd be pretty excited too. When researcher Hernandez ran outside to see what the team was freaking out about, he could have jumped for joy too. SCP-1437 wasn't spitting out rocks and dirt anymore. This time, it was a map, clearly illustrated to depict the continent of North America. But upon closer inspection, the team noticed some very apparent differences from a traditional map in the geography of our world. The map was written entirely in Spanish, and the names of countries and states it listed didn't match their existing counterparts. In fact, the entire borderlines of the map were mismatched, out of place, and radically different from anything resembling North America. It listed the government of the entire continent of North America as La República Popular de Aguas Nuevas, or when translated to English, the People's Republic of New Waters. This exciting find was logged and archived, and it was only the first of a series of objects that emerged from SCP-1437. A few days later, another object was documented. This time, it was a photograph. After initial scans determined the object to be safe to view, not harboring any dangerous memetic triggers upon viewing or anything of that nature, the team analyzed the picture to the best of their abilities. They saw a breathtaking vista of a city skyline, unlike anything possible on this world. Intertwined with buildings were massive structures that appeared to be made out of coral. They wrapped around skyscrapers, branching from the ground and sometimes emerging from the buildings themselves. The coral broke through the tops of the tallest buildings, putting the man-made titans to shame. In the far background, a massive flying creature can be seen, peacefully floating through the air. This otherworldly visual overwhelmed the team, but after the initial shock wore down, a keen-eyed junior researcher pointed out that many of the buildings resembled known landmarks, though they were radically altered in noticeable ways. This wasn't just any city. It was New York City, only this time with coral and giant floating creatures. Exactly what the Big Apple's been missing this entire time. But this was still comprehensible and understandable for the Foundation. SCP-1437's true weirdness was still yet to come. A few days after the photograph emerged, SCP-1437 shot out a truly peculiar find. Researcher Hernandez and his team were stumped as to what its purpose was and what it signified, but they determined the objects to be completely safe and archived them regardless. The items in question were a series of discs made from solid gold, varying in size but never being obscenely large. Accompanying the disc was a sheet of paper that read, "Please send more rain." The Foundation was understandably puzzled. One working theory researcher Hernandez put together was that whoever was on the opposite side of SCP-1437 was paying tribute to the whole as a form of worship and was asking the almighty beings on the other side to send more rain, for whatever reason. While the Foundation didn't exactly send the rain over themselves, whoever sent that request was probably pleased when a thunderstorm the next week sent torrents of rainwater into SCP-1437. We hope they're happy. The most notable discoveries that emerged from SCP-1437 occurred over a multi-year period. Previously, the research team theorized that SCP-1437 was connected to a single reality, and that whoever was on the other side of it was sending objects through, either by chance or by means of communication. This discovery proved that there wasn't just one parallel world connecting to SCP-1437, but many, an unknown amount, in fact. The items in question this time weren't just objects, but human cadavers. One by one over the years interspaced between the various oddities that SCP-1437 also spat out were human corpses, dead on arrival. The bodies were clad in Foundation-issue D-Class uniforms, though with some slight variations. This proved that the worlds connected to SCP-1437 were, in fact, alternate versions of the Foundation, or at least some of the worlds, as there was no way to tell who, what, or where the objects that emerged from SCP-1437 came from. Researcher Hernandez and his team examined the bodies with care and determined that they were dead long before they hit the ground, and that the gateway between worlds triggered the cause of death as they traveled between realities. Inside the D-Class jumpsuits, the team discovered pieces of paper, manuscripts that detailed their world's Foundation's documentation on SCP-1437. This deliberate inclusion of documentation signaled to the research team that there was an attempt at communication and cooperation from one world's Foundation to theirs. But why? The first body was clearly in adequate physical condition. It was protected due to being clothed in a pressure suit with an attached oxygen supply. The documentation read similarly to the SCP Foundation's documentation, though instead of special containment procedures and an object class, SCP-1437 was given a safety rating and safety containment procedures. These detail the Foundation that was giving civilians tours of their anomalies,
where they could take photographs and even get close enough to view the anomaly from a close distance. The rest of the file was similar to what Hernandez's team recorded, and listed the following objects as those that emerged from SCP-1437. One small pyramid composed of concrete, large quantities of dirt and rocks, a landscape painting, believed to be a location in Scotland. According to the painting, its originating universe's sun is blue and its sky yellow. Several discs made from solid gold. Accompanying the discs was a sheet of paper reading, "Please stop plague." A photograph of several scientists. All scientists pictured have unusually long fingers, estimated to be nearly 25 centimeters long. A sheet of paper reading, "Thank you, please send more gifts." The file continued with a notice explaining that the bodies of orange jumpsuited individuals holding documentation of the anomaly emerged from the hole. The file's unfamiliarity with jumpsuits indicate that this world lacks a concept of D-class personnel. The file mentions that, on the 15th of August 2012, a volunteer from the Foundation, Marco Perton, entered SCP-1437 wearing safety gear, taking with him a copy of this document. The second D-class body examined by Hernandez's team was branded with the phrase, "Property of the SCP Corporation." The file described an item with a threat level of little, and a Foundation that was more focused on profit than containment. After objects emerged from the hole, they were authorized to be sold to any interested collectors. Objects described by this version of the Foundation include a statue of what is believed to be a reptilian entity sporting numerous eyes and tails, large quantities of dirt and rocks, a glass bottle of water, a human femur covered in saliva, a cube comprised of several smaller cubes, all of which are different colors, purpose unknown, a soccer ball, ball only has 5 sides. The file included the SCP Corporation describing D-Class showing up, as they did in other worlds, and then the Corporation happily sending several D-Classes of their own through the hole in an attempt to communicate with whoever was on the other side. The third D-Class body examined was heavily bandaged and appeared to be blinded. There were lacerations on its arms and legs, and its tongue had been removed. The file described a Foundation akin to a religious cult. SCP-1437 was given a heathen level of unforgivable, and its holding measures described a high priest having to bless the hole every 2 years, and the need to perform blood sacrifices into it to ward off any demons. The wild incarnation of the Foundation interpreted SCP-1437 as a portal to the underworld, and described a list of objects emerging from it. It read as follows: several discs made from solid gold. Accompanying the disc was a sheet of paper reading, "Please kill foes." Large quantities of dirt and rocks, believed to be an attempt by demons to harm the High Priest, who was present at the holding site at the time. The broken remains of a human arm, covered in saliva. A photograph of a metal bird flying away from a city. What appears to be a large mushroom is visible behind the bird, believed to be an attempt by demons at mocking us. A human eye which moved when touched, believed to be a lesser demon, was burnt immediately. Unlike the other worlds, when this one received D-Classes through SCP-1437, the religious fanatics believed the bodies to be demons wearing the skin of men and threw the bodies back in the hole. The next D-Class body observed by Hernandez's team was the most curious. It was a heavily emaciated child who had apparently been lobotomized. It described a Foundation that sounds more like an organization out of a dystopian science fiction novel than anything else. The file spoke of a group of beings referred to as our masters above all, which the Foundation answered to. Any objects emerging from SCP-1437 were brought before the Masters. Any trespassers were interrogated by the Masters. This Foundation believed the objects SCP-1437 shot out were gifts for the Masters. Their list reads as follows: 1. Diamond. Large quantities of dirt and rocks. Bark from the extinct Quercus buckuli, the lower half of a human body. Delivering to supervising servant of our Masters above. It is currently unknown how the gift sender was aware of the diet of our Masters above. A document was sent into SCP-1437 thanking the gift giver for the object and requesting further tributes to our Masters above. A bottle of human-intended wine. While they certainly enjoyed the food of the human body, the wine was clearly misinterpreted. For whatever reason, this Foundation interpreted the wine as an assassination attempt on the Masters above all. As a result, they sent a large, anomalously powered explosive through SCP-1437 and into the world of an unsuspecting Foundation. The file continues with a notice from this Foundation's O5-1 which reads,
This is a reminder of why we must be vigilant in our containment procedures. From now on, I don't want any of these gifts being taken out of containment. They are a clear and present danger to our masters above. Looks like researcher Hernandez had the correct idea about not wanting to risk experimenting with SCP-1437, attracting the attention of a reality where the almighty O5 Council answers to an even more powerful human-eating group of masters above all? No, thank you. This reality's foundation is perfectly content alone. They'd spent hours making the costume. The two young boys, let's call them Johnny and Max, had always been on the creative side. Sometimes they got teased for it at school, but they didn't care. As long as they had each other, they could handle anything. They were best friends. Maybe one day they'd build great things together out of concrete and steel, but for now they worked with cardboard. Prior projects had included building a rocket out of cardboard in Johnny's backyard, like the kind that put a man on the moon. They'd also made a box fort like no other, more a box castle really, the kind that would stand for 100 years, as long as it didn't rain, of course. But all of that felt like nothing compared to the tunnel monster. To these two young friends, it was a thing of beauty. A fully articulated cardboard monster costume meticulously cobbled together from boxes, masking tape, cardboard tubes for arms and legs, and a little twine to bring it all together. Frankenstein, Dracula, Freddy Krueger. Those silver screen phonies were nothing compared to the tunnel monster. They even cut out eye holes in the head and drew the scariest snarling mouth that they could write below. The making was over, and now they were ready to play. Johnny and Max took the costume down to one of their favorite places in town, the abandoned Brechter construction site. To many would seem like a strange and dangerous place for two young children to play, but for Johnny and Max, it was perfect. After all, they were the age where they had more imagination than sense. Max would be the one wearing the costume. Johnny helped him put it on piece by piece, using extra masking tape and twine where necessary to fasten all the pieces together. Little by little, Max became the tunnel monster. The transformation was complete, and it was finally time for the games to begin. Johnny ran, wielding a stick as a defensive weapon while Max gave chase. He could feel his own hot breath within the cardboard mask. It was oddly exhilarating. He gave a monstrous roar and charged after his friend, chasing him into the child-sized pipes of an unfinished water drainage system. It was more fun than anything they could have imagined. Max really got into his role. He lunged forwards, grabbing Johnny with his cardboard gauntlets and tried to drag him back into the tunnel, all while giving low, guttural growls. Johnny laughed and swatted at Max with his stick like a knight wielding a sword. They ran and crawled through the tunnels, the best of friends having the best of times, making the kind of memories that would last forever. And in that sense, they were right. Something they made that day would echo on forever, but it wouldn't be something they would look back upon fondly. If they weren't so busy running through the tunnels, Max and Johnny might have noticed that something was amiss. They might have seen that, even though it was only 3 p.m. on a summer's day, the sky was beginning to darken. It may not have saved them, but it might have given them time to prepare for what was coming. Max was still chasing Johnny down a pipe, still fully in character as the tunnel monster, his arms extended to grab his fleeing friend while Johnny tripped. Max stopped to help him up, but something was wrong. When Max helped Johnny stand up, Johnny instinctually pushed him away, as though it wasn't actually his friend anymore. Max stumbled backwards in shock and horror. He could feel something changing beneath the cardboard. He suddenly was in pain, this terrible pain, like he was being pulled apart and put back together. He started to scream. It was a horrible sound like nails on a chalkboard. Johnny had to hold his ears as the screaming got louder and louder, but Max couldn't stop. He was hurting too much to stop. Johnny was crying. He didn't know what was happening, only that his friend was in terrible pain and that there was seemingly nothing he could do to stop it. Even Max didn't know much more than that, but he thought it might have something to do with the suit. It felt like it was full of fire ants, crawling and biting. It felt like his body was full of fire ants. He needed to take the suit off before it got any worse, but he couldn't. The suit wouldn't come off. He reached for the cardboard mask and tried to tug it off his head, but it wouldn't budge. He felt like he was tugging at the skin of his own face.
He could suddenly feel everything that brushed against the cardboard, like it was connected to his nerve endings. The fear and the panic got worse and he kept screaming. It was a deafening, ear-splitting scream. He didn't know it, but anything electrical within a 200-meter radius was dying. TVs shut off, radios fizzled out, cars stopped running. Nobody who didn't work for the SCP Foundation would ever know why. It wasn't even 3:30 p.m., but the sky above looked black as midnight. Max was afraid, but all he could do was cling to the familiar. He lunged forwards and grabbed Johnny, pulling him into his trembling embrace. Is he still Max now? No, he doesn't think so anymore. He's something else entirely. As he held his friend, Max tried to dig his fingers into the mask and tear it off. They pierced through the cardboard, tearing holes into it. It was agonizing, but the mask stayed put. There was no escape. He closed his eyes just for a moment. Maybe it was a bad dream. Maybe he could make it disappear, but it didn't disappear. Only he did. Max was no more. There was only the tunnel monster. When Johnny woke up, he was disoriented and afraid. He was in complete darkness, but he could feel the old metal of a rusty railroad track beneath his feet. He didn't remember how he got there, and he didn't remember Max either. Not his face or even his name, but that's all right. Max didn't remember him either. When the terrified Johnny eventually found his way out of the old railway tunnel he'd somehow found himself in, he was rescued by emergency services and treated for dehydration. Because of the incredibly strange circumstances of his disappearance and reappearance over 4,000 kilometers away, it was only natural for the SCP Foundation to check in. But seeing as Johnny had no memory of where he was or who he was with prior to his mysterious teleportation, all they ever did was investigate the tunnel he'd appear in. Of course, they didn't find a thing. The case was closed shortly afterwards, written off as a kind of one-off spatial anomaly. Johnny was given amnestic treatment and reintegrated back into his normal life. He would never remember his encounter with the tunnel monster, but many would, for decades and decades to come. There would be stories and scattered witness accounts from all kinds of people. Maintenance workers doing electrical repairs on subway tunnels, sewer workers cleaning up blockages in pipes, road workers fixing the asphalt in underpasses. The challenge with being an SCP Foundation field agent is often separating the genuine leads from the urban legends and spooky stories. But the details here were all too similar and specific. After all, it would be such a strange thing to make up. A moldy old pile of cardboard boxes getting up and running towards you. But stranger still, these incidents and encounters were occurring all over the United States, with the only commonalities being that all of them happened in tunnels or tunnel-like structures. The Foundation didn't know if they were dealing with one entity or many. Another peculiar factor they observed was that sometimes people who had encounters with the tunnel monster then themselves appear in tunnels extremely far away from the ones in which they first encountered it. As far as the Foundation was aware, besides transporting them vast distances, it never actually harmed any of its victims. But according to one Boston sewer worker, Gus Zagrelia, when the tunnel monster laid its cardboard hand on him, he felt the most profound sense of paranoia and dread. He described it as feeling like 1,000 eyes in the dark, watching you die. Then he blinked and he woke up in an Arizona viaduct roughly 6 hours later. Everyone who reported a similar experience with the tunnel monster was detained, debriefed, and given amnestics by the Foundation. Eventually, they gathered enough data on prior encounters to accurately predict the next tunnel that the tunnel monster would manifest inside. A new mobile task force was formed to secure the creature, MTF Nu 4, also known as the Box Cutters. What they didn't expect was that when they finally engaged the beast, was that it was no larger than a human child. It wasn't some huge tunnel-dwelling nightmare, even after all these decades. The tunnel monster was little more than a frightened, lonely little boy. He growled, attempting and failing to come off as intimidating to these hardcore MTF members, and referred to himself as the tunnel monster. When they didn't react with fear and surprise like the others, he became subdued. They were able to peacefully apprehend him and take him back to Site 54 for testing and containment. Preliminary x-rays found that the cardboard costume hadn't just fused with the boy, it had completely transformed him. On the inside, he was filled with crude cardboard copies of all the major internal organs, with his blood vessels and nerve endings made out of colored pieces of string. They couldn't find any information on who the boy was, if he had ever been a boy at all, and he was given the designation SCP-3663. In order to find out more, one of the leading researchers on the SCP-3663 case, researcher Doyle, decided to conduct an interview with the tunnel monster. It had been the only interview with the creature to date, due to the emotional distress it caused the creature. When asked about its identity, it replied with only the tunnel monster. When asked why it attacked and teleported people to different locations, the creature replied, "The tunnel monster captures people. That's me. I'm the tunnel monster. I capture people and take them into the tunnels where I live. In the tunnels, the pipes. I'm the tunnel monster." As the interview progressed, the tunnel monster became increasingly upset until it began weeping through its cardboard face, finally culminating with its crying out between sobs, "Please, I don't want to play anymore." SCP-3663 only feels comfortable in tunnels and will teleport away in distress if confined anywhere else. As such, its containment chamber is technically the maintenance tunnels underneath Site-54, where it seems to have made a home for itself. Occasionally, if it experiences fear, damage, or stress, it may de-manifest and appear in tunnels elsewhere. At that point, the box cutters are deployed to collect 3663 once again and bring him back to Site-54. So far, there has only been one major containment breach with SCP-3663, but it was a little more deadly than you might expect for a boy-sized creature made of cardboard. The tunnel monster escaped from the Site-54 tunnels and began wailing in pain. It went positively berserk, attacking surrounding staff and trashing parts of the facility. Anyone who heard the wails of the tunnel monster reported becoming extremely psychologically disturbed by them. During this 4-hour rampage, the monster also tried multiple times to destroy itself with various implements, but was unsuccessful. After SCP-3663 was recontained, 2 deceased members of personnel were recovered from the scene. Autopsies showed the cause of death was a buildup of paper residue and wood pulp in all of their major blood vessels, as well as sinuses, ear tubes, and the majority of the digestive and respiratory systems. A number of other staff members were found to have been affected to a lesser degree, but are expected to make full recoveries. What triggered this explosive and deadly outburst? Not even the tunnel monster itself knew the answer to this question. But we do. At exactly the same time, a 79-year-old man passed away from natural causes after what seemed like a thoroughly unremarkable life. That man's name was Johnny. The year is 1941, and the world is gripped by the most violent and widespread war in history. Millions march to war as bloody battles are fought across the globe. Horrendous atrocities are carried out on groups of people, and parts of London are bombed to rubble on a weekly basis. Considering it's only been 20 years since the last World War, it must seem to the early residents of the early 20th century that the world is coming apart at the seams. And amongst the chaos, it'd be easy not to notice a secluded manor house in the English countryside disappearing without a trace for 11 days, before suddenly returning to our reality. But thankfully, one organization makes it its sole duty to notice the unnoticeable and understand the impossible, the SCP Foundation. And within that anomalous manor house, Foundation agents and researchers were about to find horrors beyond even their darkest imaginations. This is the grim tale of SCP-1461, better known as the House of the Worm. When the manor house reappeared after its 11-day absence, the Foundation zeroed in, sending agents inside to investigate. It was a 2-level dwelling complete with 12 bedrooms, 4 baths, 3 studies, a main foyer/ballroom, a library, a kitchen, and a pantry basement. The Foundation observed that a number of these rooms had been fitted with rows of bunk beds, similar to a boarding house or barracks. Only later would they understand why. They found that the upper portion of the home exhibited no abnormal qualities whatsoever. But as the agents investigated further, they found an entrance to the truly anomalous portion of the manor, the extensive sub-level system.
No previous records of the building kept by the local council indicated that there would be anything below the manor's basement, so either the mysterious previous occupants, who were nowhere to be found, had built this sublevel or had just appeared here on its own. Regardless of which was the case, agents and researchers knew that whatever had happened down here had everything to do with the manor's mysterious disappearance. They descended into the depths of what seemed like a man-made cave system, constructed primarily from a mix of concrete, iron, and brass. It was a behemoth of 20th century technology, intricate snaking systems of pipes, gears, and pumping pistons. It was like someone had built an entire factory down here. But for what? The agents began to spread out through the labyrinthian bowels of the manor, hoping to find some answers. But all they seemed to discover was more questions. This place hadn't been built with any form of comprehensible logic. It was full of dead ends, stairways that ascended and descended to nowhere, doors that would open to reveal just walls behind them or not open at all. It was like a maze built by a maniac. It didn't help that it looked like the place was recently hit by an earthquake, with some passages caved in and mangled machinery strewn about. It seemed that no human workers had interfered with the impossibly complex and bizarre machinery in quite some time. A number of the materials used to construct said machinery, as well as the gray sandstone filling in the collapsed passageways, remain unidentified to this day. Already, the sublevel was proving to be a complex puzzle box with only an estimated 75% of its layout ultimately being mapped by Foundation researchers. However, they would soon realize that this place wasn't just confusing, it was deadly. The only method of self-maintenance detected by the exploring agents were pipes that would fire a thick black lubricant onto the surrounding machinery. One of the Foundation agents had the misfortune of getting covered in it while exploring a darkened passageway, and 80% of his body was melted as a result. It appeared that the viscous black goo was incredibly corrosive to all organic matter. A number of the machines also emitted dangerously high quantities of gamma and X-ray radiation, making it difficult to explore many of the caverns without heavy hazmat protection. And worst of all, were the extremely hostile creatures living in the caves who would regularly attack Foundation personnel. These abominations came to be known as SCP-1461-1, vicious steampunk Frankenstein monsters, once human, but with large parts of their bodies replaced by crude mechanical implants, including metal teeth and claws. 1461-1s have displayed a taste for human flesh, and they have dragged multiple Foundation agents down into their lair to be converted into monsters like them. It's believed that SCP-1461 is capable of controlling these beasts through the strategic use of sound from its brass-speaking pipes, leading them into areas where Foundation personnel are present to instigate conflict. Many of these pitiful creatures have had their throats replaced by phonographs, endlessly repeating the same nonsense phrases over and over again. I am what you have made me. I am choice, and I am tyranny. Forgive me. I am then and I am now, what gods they will be then. I am evil and I am flesh. I am the trap. I am beauty and I am chaos. Children are selfish. I am the worm. I have broken God. Still, in spite of the mazes, monsters, and deadly chemicals, the agents persisted and managed to discover several important locations. The gel production chamber on sublevel 3 creates glass jars from the unidentified sandstone and fills them with a slime that looks to contain living eyes and teeth. The factory deliveries room is filled with a huge number of crates and boxes, which seem to shift and change in number between Foundation patrols. The speaking tube room on sublevel 11 contains a grand pulpit that acts as the connecting point for the complex array of speaking tubes running through the entire cave system. The body parts of a deceased female also appear to be wired into the machinery, like spare parts. And on sublevel 12, they found the so-called catalyst room. Here they discovered a huge, complicated, clockwork and steam-powered machine that appeared to be broken and missing some parts. Most horrifying of all, though, is the raised platform in the center of the catalyst room, on top of which is a metal hospital bed. A desiccated male corpse rests upon the bed, its chest punctured by large syringes connected by tubes to some kind of pumping machine. The parts connecting this pumping machine to the overall apparatus of the room were missing though, leaving its purpose a mystery. The Foundation assumed that fluids used to be drawn out of this corpse to somehow power the machine. You may be starting to worry that there doesn't seem to be any answers here, that this house is one big mystery. But lucky for you, you're wrong. An old journal was also discovered in the catalyst room, and if what was written inside is to be believed, then we may finally have some truth about who created the House of the Worm, why it was created, and what horrible events triggered its mysterious disappearance and reappearance. His true name has been redacted by the Foundation, and special efforts have been made to maintain secrecy around the house, seeing as it's an anomaly of great interest to a cult known as the Church of the Broken God. So we'll just call the one who made this place the Inventor. Before any of this, the Inventor was one of the many Englishmen traumatized and almost killed in the horrific trench battles of World War I. After a near-death experience, the Inventor, like many geniuses and madmen, was plagued by surreal and nightmarish visions. He saw a huge creature that he referred to as the Worm, a gigantic metal monstrosity with dragon-like jaws full of gnashing gears that rampaged through Europe, destroying and devouring everything in its path. These apocalyptic visions also presented him with a solution, vague blueprints for a machine that might be the salvation of him and others willing to take his new gospel to heart. An escape from a world that the Inventor knew in his heart was about to end. He hired work-starved laborers from across the country to help him make his visions a reality, and began a massive secret construction project beneath his isolated country manor house. For the Inventor, it was all a labor of love. He wanted to protect his wife, son, and daughter from the terrible jaws of the worm. But as the project stretched on, his wife began to suspect that he'd lost his mind. Many of his workers, however, felt just the opposite. They became infatuated by the Inventor's sermons on the nature of the worm and the coming apocalypse they hoped to escape. Soon enough, they had become a bona fide cult, constructing the elaborate sublevels underneath the house in preparation for the fast-approaching day of reckoning. Then came World War II. The Inventor saw Hitler, hungry for war, as one of the avatars of the worm. Finally, knowing that the time was right, he activated the machine and successfully trapped the worm in the bowels of his mechanized home. However, as the Blitz raged and London's bombing began, the Inventor felt as though he hadn't stopped anything. He realized once and for all that he was never meant to stop the apocalypse, only escape it. And by throwing the final switch and setting the machine he and his followers had built into overdrive, he did just that. This was the moment that the House of the Worm disappeared, transporting the Inventor, his family, and his devoted staff to a different world. An empty gray world, devoid of war but also lacking all the comforts of regular life, including food. Things went downhill from there, as their supplies quickly began to run out, and the cult descended into cannibalism in order to survive. Things weren't going much better in the Inventor's personal life. His wife, fearing what would happen to the family, took her own life and the life of his daughter. Though by this point, the Inventor's mind was so fractured that it's possible he may have killed them himself. Either way, it was only the Inventor and his son left, and more trouble was brewing. Eudora, one of the staff trapped in the building with the Inventor and his cult, started a mutiny. She claimed the worm spoke to her from below, and that their only path to salvation was pleasing the worm. How would they please it? A sacrifice, of course. They would give it the son of the man who had trapped it. The mutineers took the Inventor's only remaining child and descended into the lowest sublevels. The Inventor followed, hoping to track them down, save his son, and salvage something from this nightmare. As he ventured deeper, battling the members of Eudora's new cult, he found that they were changing themselves, becoming the half-human cyborg creatures that the Foundation would later discover. The Inventor would find Eudora herself in the speaking tube room. Her body, still living, was wired into the machinery, and she had sacrificed his son to the worm. In a rage, the Inventor murdered Eudora, or whatever was left of her, then heard a familiar voice speaking out of a nearby speaking tube. It said, "I am what you have made me. I am then, and I am now. I am choice, and I am tyranny. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am beauty, and I am chaos. I am the worm." The voice was his own. In that terrible moment, the Inventor realized that the worm wasn't a giant all-devouring monster.
It was him. In trying to protect his loved one from a perceived apocalypse, he'd brought them all to their horrible demise. He'd trapped them with the monster he'd hoped for them all to escape from, because no matter what you build, you can't escape from who you are. Grief-stricken and broken, the inventor descended into the catalyst room. There was his son, stuck with the syringes, drained of all life to fuel the mighty machine his father had created. In his last moments, the inventor decided to do the only noble thing. He threw himself into the machine, destroying both it and himself in the process. The house was transported back to our own reality, but the worm, in a sense, was no more. But who knows if the worm is really dead? Its thoughts and poisonous intent still lingers in the caverns and rattles through the speaking pipes. Whatever really happened, the Foundation is still picking up the pieces today, and who knows what lurks in the parts still hidden from our knowledge. It has long been the mission of the SCP Foundation to secure and contain any anomalies they encounter, all to protect the safety of the human race. Sometimes containing an SCP is a trivial task, as simple as guarding a room or keeping an eye on an artifact with strange but mostly harmless properties. Other times, though, anomalies require a considerable number of the Foundation's personnel and resources to keep them under control. This latter category commonly includes some of the most dangerous creatures and entities that the SCP Foundation keeps under lock and key. However, while it might be only in very rare cases, every so often an SCP comes along with its very own built-in method of containment. This can often be the result of someone encountering an anomaly and discovering the perfect way of imprisoning it before the SCP Foundation comes along and steals all the credit. Undoubtedly, this makes the job of securing an anomaly all the easier for the Foundation's staff. After all, someone else has already done the hard part of the job for them. Or rather, it would make things easier if only the Foundation's own researchers chose not to interfere and could leave a deadly threat kept safely in its box without trying to find out what makes it tick. SCP-5001 is, in some ways, a reminder that some things are best left alone, but it is also a grave warning not to tamper with that which you do not understand. Both of these lessons would soon be imparted on the SCP Foundation. Buried 60 kilometers below the ground in northern Russia is SCP-5001, a 53-kilometer wide structure. It is an enormous biomechanical machine, but to the untrained eye there is nothing anomalous about the object. And according to the Foundation's findings, this is indeed the case. There is nothing inherently anomalous about the structure itself. But there are a number of characteristics that seem to suggest it is, in some way, connected to anomalous phenomena. For one, there's the sheer scale of the structure, and then there's the records that were uncovered about SCP-5001, which appear to have been monitoring and tracking its status. Perhaps whoever constructed it or discovered it kept a record as they observed the structure. Nothing too out of the ordinary about that. But what's strange is that these date back to 11,000 BC. And yet were somehow made with modern systems of measurement. And other weirder documents have been recovered from inside of SCP-5001. Records written in languages from all over the world, and even some in languages lost to time. Among them are papers in Phoenician, Ancient Hebrew, both Ancient and Modern Greek, Latin, Anglo-Saxon, along with Modern Russian, English, and Mandarin. Some of these documents are even written in languages that the SCP Foundation's top researchers are yet to properly identify. The explanation for all this would seem obvious, wouldn't it? Writing in both ancient and contemporary languages, records that date all the way back to the last of the prehistoric era, it all seems to point in a certain direction. Somehow, SCP-5001 has a link to time travel. Perhaps it was even a hub for a group of time travelers, right? Wrong. The Foundation already thought that this might be the case and checked for any signs of temporal anomalies. And yet, they found nothing. No evidence to suggest that there had ever been any time travel near or using SCP-5001. There were no devices on site that could affect time, and no traces of any residue or fallout from a temporal occurrence. So what exactly does this thing even do? Well, we're afraid to say the Foundation researchers have been stumped on the answer to that question too, and they are not the only ones either. Way back in the 50s, the GRU's Division P also had an interest in SCP-5001. For anyone who isn't already acquainted with them, they are one of the SCP Foundation's numerous groups of interest, a list of organizations, corporations, and agencies from around the world who have also had dealings with anomalies. In the case of GRU-P, they were originally a division of the Russian army during the Cold War. The specialty of GRU Division P was the acquisition of anomalous objects and entities. In other words, they were the Soviet Union's very own SCP Foundation. In 1953, GRU Division P was alerted to abnormal seismic activity in a narrow region of northern Russia. A team was immediately sent in to investigate and began attempting to take seismic measurements of the area in question. During their various experiments and tests, GRU Division P realized a discrepancy in their readings. Again and again, they checked and double-checked their results, only to discover that this reading wasn't the result of faulty equipment or even human error. There was something big nearby. What they hadn't yet realized was around 30 kilometers away, deep underground, was SCP-5001. Immediately, GRU Division P began drilling towards the location of SCP-5001, but for years found that they were unable to breach the exterior of the structure. Defeated, the project was abandoned in 1955. However, Soviet leader First Secretary Khrushchev seemed to have a vested interest in gaining access to SCP-5001. As a result, he privately funded the GRU Division P operation, allowing them to continue their work in secret for a number of years, from 1959 until Khrushchev was disposed in 1964. Of course, this was all during the height of the Cold War, but by the late 1960s, international relations between the Soviet Union and the United States of America were starting to ease. Thanks to the relaxing tensions, a contract was introduced allowing the two nations' secret organizations to work together on a number of operations involving potentially dangerous anomalies. This meant that the SCP Foundation was finally able to step in and contribute to the GRU Division P's project concerning SCP-5001. Their first task? Actually getting inside the subterranean structure. Naturally, given how well-versed the Foundation is in dealing with anomalies, they had ideas for how to crack this nut. By acquiring anomalous technology from the Global Occult Coalition, another group of interest, as well as experimental designs created by one Dr. Elijah Rachma, the SCP Foundation were finally able to breach the structure in 1971. From then until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the SCP Foundation and GRU Division P worked together to conduct a number of studies into the origin and purpose of SCP-5001. Both organizations were curious as to the technology the structure possessed, and attempts were even made to recreate some of the devices found within. Among this advanced technology were ontological stabilizers, also known as Scranton reality anchors, which are located around SCP-5001's inner chamber. These were designed to directly alter the amount of Humes in a given area. What's a Hume? Well, to keep it simple, a Hume is a measure of the reality around us. If it helps, imagine reality as a pile of sand. Now imagine that you remove a single grain of sand from the pile. Congratulations, you just removed one Hume from this reality. Taking one away doesn't really do much, but start grabbing handfuls and the pile gets smaller, scattered. Less a pile and more a light dusting of sand. Reality works the same way. Take too much away and it starts to lose whatever it was before. Being able to alter the amount of Humes in an area meant that these ontological stabilizers could alter the strength of reality itself, even nullify the reality-bending properties of some anomalies. In theory, an SCP with the power to influence reality could be contained using this technology. The effects of their abilities reduced significantly, although not negated entirely. Another noteworthy piece of technology uncovered was codenamed Omega. Omega was discovered in an unmarked room on a computer terminal that was connected to every area of SCP-5001 by dozens of cables. The software itself was an artificial intelligence construct, a computerized consciousness that seemed to serve the purpose of controlling the various systems within SCP-5001. The Omega seemed to work by providing an answer whenever someone used a keyboard to input a question. The artificial intelligence of Omega appeared able to hold a conversation, but would refuse to give any insight into when the SCP-5001 structure was built or what its purpose was. Despite neither group knowing what SCP-5001's function was, an agreement between the SCP Foundation and GRU Division P was formed. Both organizations shared the belief that Omega, the ontological stabilizers, as well as the other anomalous technologies could never, under any circumstances, be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. They had a pact to keep the knowledge of SCP-5001 and these devices strictly between themselves. However, this agreement was, sadly, not to last. In the early 90s, GRU Division P liquidated its assets and disbanded. A number of the Russian division's highest-ranking officers stole the anomalous technology that the organization had in its possession, which they then sold to Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited. MC&D Ltd are yet another of the SCP Foundation's groups of interest. According to Foundation intelligence, Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited is a London-based club that has caused numerous problems for the Foundation over the years. They have ties to wealthy figures across the globe and cater to the super-rich clientele by providing them with the most exclusive, expensive, and rare experiences available. How do they do this? By gathering the anomalous items and auctioning them off to the highest bidders. A number of GRU Division P operatives also joined up with the Chaos Insurgency. This is a group of interest that consists of personnel who previously worked for the Foundation, but have since broken away to pursue their own rogue agenda. Much like a number of other groups of interest, the insurgency uses anomalies and SCPs for their own benefit, as well as dabbling in a bit of arms dealing and the selling of highly classified intelligence. Hey, it's good to have a diverse portfolio. Despite former members of GRU Division P seeking alternative employment with some less than reputable groups, the SCP Foundation still managed to keep the existence and location of SCP-5001 a closely guarded secret. However, even with the structure fully under their control, their leading researchers were still baffled as to what exactly the purpose of the underground structure was, or rather, that was the case. On December 30th, 2019, an explosion erupted in the northeast sector of SCP-5001. The cause of the explosion was unknown, but the damage caused a tremendous and almost catastrophic loss of power. Whether the explosion had been triggered by one of the many groups of interest, like the former GRU Division P, or just a machinery malfunction, it almost caused the total destruction of SCP-5001. What would be so bad about that? Well, remember earlier when we said that every so often an SCP comes along with its very own built-in method of containment? You see, it wasn't the structure or technology of SCP-5001 that the Foundation should have been worried about. It was the thing inside of SCP-5001. Just as some Foundation researchers had long theorized, SCP-5001 was a cage, a containment unit for its own anomalous objects within, something powerful enough to alter reality right down to the Humes, hence the need for ontological stabilizers to dampen its power, and Omega to keep the place running. This entity, known either as SCP-5001-A or the Devourer, was being held inside SCP-5001, and when the structure was damaged, it was almost freed. While there was no data on SCP-5001's computer system about this being's appearance or the extent of its anomalous powers, whoever created SCP-5001 went to considerable effort to keep the Devourer contained, viewing it as a threat to all of reality. And all that effort was almost undone when the structure was damaged by the explosion. Fortunately, the SCP Foundation was able to re-establish containment of SCP-5001-A, though at the cost of a tremendous amount of lives. When personnel were finally permitted to re-enter SCP-5001, a number of the structure's core systems had been damaged, but it was still able to perform its primary function and keep the Devourer safely contained within. As personnel entered the structure, a message appeared through the Omega computer system that read, "Hello, my children. Although you have grown immensely since your earliest days, you have much room to grow. Your species' intellect is merely a bud with so much potential. Your weapons are powerful. Your medicine is supreme. Your engineering is beautiful. With proper guidance and care, you are sure to reach an elevated state of being and transcend your bodies for something more whole and perfect. That is why it pains me so dearly to request that you leave this place immediately. Your studying and probing have almost resulted in the end of all I have worked towards to keep you alive. If you comply, I guarantee that the Devourer will never escape, and your species will be free to pursue the enlightenment of technology for all eternity. Let this be my final gift to you, directly from the center of my broken heart.
Okay, back up. Broken heart. Interesting. Where have we heard something like that before? We'd hate to jump to any conclusions, but when one hears about a being of great power related to large and mysterious machines, and that word again, broken, all the groups of interest that seem to be tied into SCP-5001, and we'd neglected to mention perhaps the most important of all, the Church of the Broken God. This religious organization that reveres industry and technology over the impurity of flesh has been united in a singular purpose, rebuilding their deity, the broken god Mechane, whose body was split apart in an attempt to preserve the future of mankind. Perhaps the heart of this great and ancient machine, this Devourer, is actually the heart of something else entirely. Though of course, there's only so much we can speculate. Knowledge, after all, can sometimes be like a flame. It can light your way, but if you get too close, you will inevitably be burned. If ever you're in doubt, ask the people devoured and assimilated by the heart of Mechane the last time it was freed by the Church. If ever the heart gets out again, you'll certainly be with them.
The SCP Foundation has come so far. Their technology, their knowledge, their vast resources all allow them to contain some of the most powerful forces mankind has ever seen, and even some we haven't. But as SCP-5001 shows, there is still much that even the brightest researchers at the Foundation don't yet understand, and their drive to poke and prod at the unknown nearly led to the end of reality as we know it. Perhaps one day we'll be able to fully understand just what the Devourer is, and the ways that SCP-5001 worked to protect us from it, but we're not there yet, and there's no guarantee that we ever will be. While the pursuit of knowledge is always an admirable one, when it comes to SCP-5001, maybe the Foundation should have left well enough alone.
An SCP Foundation researcher sits at a table inside of a standard containment cell. These are often dangerous places to be, especially when the SCP you're supposed to be studying is one that you can't see. The researcher is taking notes, unsure of exactly what is going to happen next. He can hear the sounds of knives scraping behind, of flesh sizzling and searing from high heat. He braces himself as a burst of heat hits the back of his head, as if a fireball has erupted. An object floats through the air and settles in front of him on the table. It's a plate of food, and it looks delicious. It may surprise you to learn that there is no rule that the SCP Foundation must deal exclusively with violent and vicious creatures. Not every SCP held in containment shares the same malevolence and contempt for humanity as SCP-682, or the world-ending threat posed by the likes of SCP-2317. Some, perhaps not many, but some, are benign and might even seem outwardly friendly, but you'd still be taking a huge risk to assume that anything contained by the SCP Foundation is completely harmless. Such is the case with SCP-5031. As per the Foundation's containment procedures, this quasi-humanoid, meaning it appears to have some vaguely human features, is held in an airtight cell that is regularly checked by Foundation personnel on a bi-weekly basis. SCP-5031 has no need for regular nutrition or regular interactions from staff. The trick with SCP-5031 is not being eaten by it, since though it doesn't need food, it does still hunt and consume anything it encounters, human or otherwise. Avoiding being eaten is hard enough with creatures that can actually be seen, but like so many other creatures the Foundation keeps contained, SCP-5031 has developed an almost perfect defense mechanism, which is when observed, it will literally cease to exist. Some might choose to refer to this as a quantum lock.
However, it is worth noting that traces left by SCP-5031 still remain observable when the creature has temporarily disappeared. For example, trails of blood and scratch marks left behind by SCP-5031 still exist when the SCP itself does not. Naturally, this makes both avoiding the creature and capturing it using cameras difficult. However, when SCP-5031's existence ceases, it still casts a shadow. From this, researchers have been able to determine several of the creature's physical traits. Based on its silhouette, it has been deduced that SCP-5031 levitates about half a meter above ground level, sports an abnormally small necklace head atop an elongated torso, approximately 1.9 meters long, with 3 sets of spindly lower arms that branch outwards. Using these arms and its loosely hanging body, SCP-5031 will lower itself to hunt any human or animal that draws near to it, and uses the blade-like tail to cut up food. Perhaps the most interesting facet of SCP-5031 beyond its defensive capabilities and apparent physical attributes are the series of 9 tests conducted by senior researcher Stanley Huxtable. Appalled by the conditions that the creature was being kept in, Huxtable took over the role of HCL supervisor for SCP-5031. Having grown increasingly frustrated and empathetic towards the creature, listening to its screams from inside its iron containment unit, Huxtable devised a series of tests to introduce SCP-5031 to various different stimuli as a way to better understand the creature, and hopefully keep it contained in a way that didn't seem to cause so much suffering. It's worth remembering that the SCP Foundation makes its mission to be cold, not cruel, in performing their duties to protect normality, and many of the researchers and staff are just as capable of having empathy for creatures as you might for a stray animal at a shelter. The first of Huxtable's tests involved installing speakers in SCP-5031's cell, through which a variety of different ambient and popular pieces of music were played to see if they had any effect on reducing the creature's stress. By judging SCP-5031's stress levels based on how much it screamed when compared to normal, Huxtable was able to determine how to best use music to calm the creature. SCP-5031 seemed to convey higher levels of stress when listening to Morning Forest, Deep Grotto, and Seaside Paradise ambience, as well as the best of late 60s British rock band Jethro Tull. However, the best of Mozart, Enya, Kiss, and Ben Folds produced dramatically different results, decreasing SCP-5031's apparent stress. Following this test, senior researcher Huxtable compiled a playlist featuring SCP-5031's favorite music. Over time, the stress-reducing effects of music on SCP-5031 seemed to decrease, but keeping the playlist on shuffle seemed to keep the creature consistently calmer than it had been previously. The next test involved introducing inanimate objects into SCP-5031's enclosure to monitor its reactions and how its stress levels were affected. When a softball was thrown into the enclosure, SCP-5031 immediately sliced the ball in two with its tail in one swift motion. A similar result occurred when researchers threw the creature a basketball, which was quickly punctured and sliced open by SCP-5031's tail. Its stress levels first seemed to diminish when the creature was offered a bowling ball, which it rolled around the enclosure and then later knocked it against a second bowling ball. However, when one of the balls chipped, rendering it unable to roll properly, SCP-5031's stress increased dramatically until a replacement was offered. Researcher Huxtable noted that SCP-5031 seemed to possess a similar level of motor skills to an average human toddler, with similarly explosive emotional reactions to match. Next, when given the choice between 2 food sources at opposite ends of its enclosure, SCP-5031 seemed to gravitate towards higher quality food, most notably favored cooked rotisserie chickens over animal carcasses. It even chose this option over a live chicken, using its tail to cut its food into more manageable bite-sized portions, rather than ripping its meat with its hands or teeth like many of its fellow SCPs. Researcher Huxtable recorded these findings and highlighted that, even though SCP-5031 didn't need to eat in order to survive, providing the creature with food of a better quality marginally reduced its stress. Senior researcher Huxtable next attempted to test SCP-5031's coexistence with other living subjects, each time making sure that the creature had been adequately fed to avoid any unseemly incidents. First, a live chicken was introduced. SCP-5031 rolled its bowling ball at high speed towards the chicken, increasing both its and the chicken's stress levels, and inadvertently killing the chicken in the process. When a second chicken was introduced, SCP-5031 gently rolled a basketball towards it, but ceased any further engagement after the chicken squawked from being hit by the ball. Next to be introduced into the enclosure was a blindfolded D-Class staff member, who was instructed to sit down and roll the basketball towards SCP-5031. After doing so for several minutes, the creature began to approach the D-Class subject, who was instructed to remove their blindfold to cease the creature's existence and prevent any potentially deadly incidents. Finally, Researcher Huxtable had another Class D engage in a game of catch with SCP-5031 while facing away from the creature. This test proceeded successfully, and Senior Researcher Huxtable remarked how SCP-5031's motor skills were improving, albeit gradually and with some gentle encouragement. Through Huxtable's tests, the creature was learning. The next test, focused on teaching SCP-5031 linguistic symbols, utilized LCD displays and buttons connected to a food dispenser. One display showed an image of a rock, and the other an image of a rotisserie chicken. After some brief probing, SCP-5031 was quickly able to understand that pressing the button under the correct display would dispense a rotisserie chicken for it to eat. The creature was later able to adapt when, the following day, the screen displays and materials dispensed were swapped, and then later set to swap at random intervals. When additional rock dispensing stations were introduced, this time displaying the word rock as opposed to an image, SCP-5031 was able to determine which station dispensed chicken through a process of elimination. Whenever the functions and displays were swapped, SCP-5031 would find whichever displayed the word chicken to receive its food. The final phase of this test presented SCP-5031 with a single station, displaying the word chicken, but with a button that would remain inactive unless the creature spelled out the same word with a collection of lettered blocks it was provided with. After some initial confusion and frustrations as to why the button would not dispense food when pressed, SCP-5031 was able to assemble the word correctly, not only activating the button and dispensing food, but proving to Researcher Huxtable that the creature was capable of learning language. Huxtable continued to test the creature, encouraging it to spell words using lettered blocks as a method of communicating. By increasing SCP-5031's vocabulary and the amount of human interaction it received, Senior Researcher Huxtable observed that SCP-5031 was gradually learning to sing, albeit non-verbally, as well as to juggle with its 6 hands, and was even communicating its food preferences and dish pairings. Later, another Class D, D-52125, was introduced to SCP-5031's enclosure to aid in further testing. Through D-52125's instructions, the creature quickly learned to draw using crayons, and created artworks depicting itself, its newfound friend D-52125, Researcher Huxtable, a cat, and a rotisserie chicken. SCP-5031's new creative side didn't stop there though, as the creature quickly learned to play chopsticks in only 2 days once a piano was introduced into the enclosure. SCP-5031 even managed to start creating its own original, admittedly crude, compositions. Next, a spice rack was placed inside the creature's cell, and D-52125 demonstrated how to season meat. This proved to be SCP-5031's new favorite hobby, as it spent the next 3 days experimenting with different combinations of foods and spices, using its letter blocks to request more garlic powder. Interestingly, the creature only created artwork or music when D-52125 was present, but seemed to thoroughly enjoy its experimentation with food when left alone. Following this development, Senior Researcher Huxtable devised a new test for SCP-5031, providing the creature with cooking utensils and using D-52125 to demonstrate. 5031 was shown how to prepare a variety of different dishes, from hamburgers and tacos to Mongolian beef, steak, clam chowder, and profiteroles. In addition to a small peanut allergy, this 8th test revealed SCP-5031 to be a phenomenal chef, possessing culinary skills far beyond the average person. The creature quickly and enthusiastically embraced its newfound talents, concocting its very own brand new recipes, with D-52125 even volunteering to be the first to taste test 5031's dishes. It was shortly after this test that SCP-5031 spoke its very first word. And it should come as no surprise that the word was salt. Naturally, senior researcher Huxtable was very proud of the progress the creature had made with its development. The final test almost seemed to be what the creature was born for. Over the course of 2 months, SCP-5031 was tasked with creating a full 3-course meal, which would then be served to Foundation staff for Thanksgiving. SCP-5031 not only rose to the task, but exceeded all of researcher Huxtable's expectations, creating a meal that even Gordon Ramsay would be hard-pressed to find fault with. The creature created a first course consisting of sweet potato miso soup seasoned with turmeric. Next came a beautiful duck confit, glazed luxuriously with apple cider, and topped generously with sweet cranberry compote, paired with a side of butternut squash gnocchi and served on a bed of kale seasoned with truffle salt. The grand finale of the exquisite meal was a spiced cassava pie for dessert, complemented with the finest French vanilla ice cream and a maple hazelnut syrup. And SCP-5031 didn't stop there. The creature also debuted one of its original musical compositions to complement the decadent meal it had created. As the staff enjoyed the food, SCP-5031 performed live from its enclosure the deeply moving Piano Concerto for 6 hands, to an overwhelmingly positive response from not only senior researcher Huxtable, but the entire Foundation staff. As a fitting end to the creature's tale, Huxtable reported that, during the Thanksgiving banquet it had created, SCP-5031's stress levels reduced entirely. New, kinder containment measures that would keep 5031 safer but also far more contented were submitted for approval. Perhaps some of you may find it refreshing to learn that SCP-5031 isn't simply just another malicious, malevolent monster that the Foundation has to keep under lock and key for the safety of the world. Instead, SCP-5031 is a gentle, if a little frightening at first, creature that just requires careful and considered guidance instead of a cold iron cage and around-the-clock armed guards. Through testing, senior researcher Stanley Huxtable and his fellow Foundation staff were not only able to help the creature develop, but also found what makes it tick, and not just for the purposes of containing it. Instead, it is hoped that SCP-5031's creativity and flair for culinary and musical masterpieces can continue to thrive and grow, under the proud watch of researcher Huxtable. Did you ever have to perform a dissection in school? Maybe you had to carve up a fetal pig, or slice into a frog while nightmarish visions of Kermit and a widowed Miss Piggy danced in your head. Though it's rarely a pleasant experience, unless your tastes are on the morbid side. Most biology teachers would agree that the best way to learn how something works is to take it apart. As distasteful as it can be to hold a frog's tiny liver in your hands, it definitely does give you a better sense of the pieces that make up the complete creature. But what if there was an easier way to look at the individual parts of a living being? What if you could take it apart without ever having to prep a scalpel or stain your hands with the blood of innocent frogs? Like most of the seemingly impossible things in our world, the SCP Foundation discovered something that allows its users to do just that. In fact, it can handle a lot more than just a frog, and its applications go far beyond the confines of a high school science lab. SCP-291 is a small, plain steel building with a large door on one side. The door has no handle or knob and functions similarly to a garage door. The door cannot be pried open by any ordinary means, and the inside of SCP-291 can only be accessed if the structure is connected to a suitable power source. Once a power source has been connected, the door races and exposes a room inside. It is small, about 4 by 2 meters. It contains a console board, a large screen, and a plexiglass container resembling a coffin. How very sinister. The coffin is large enough to contain a human under 7 feet tall. So sorry, Ferdinand the Cannibal, you're going to need to sit this one out. The coffin sits on a conveyor belt with several tubes connected to the wall above it. On the opposite side of the room, there are holes of varying sizes, each containing a small door that can be opened or closed. Because initial observation indicated that SCP-291 was intended for some kind of human testing, a D-class test subject was selected for experimentation. The subject was instructed to lie down in the coffin and wait to see what would happen next. The display screen lit up, depicting a grid-lined image of the test subject. Buttons along the console board adjusted the image, showing the skin, muscles, and organ systems of the person in the coffin. There were no words or numbers on the screen, and all of the buttons appeared to have only two settings: on and off. When one of the researchers pressed the first button on the console, the tubes above the coffin began pouring a blue liquid into it. The test subject reacted with confusion, but did not experience any adverse effects. They quickly lost consciousness, indicating that the liquid was some sort of sedative. The liquid continued to pour into the coffin until the vessel was completely filled, at which point it congealed into a thick gel. The test subject's breathing and heartbeat slowed to a stop, and the conveyor belt suddenly creaked to life. The coffin was carried, test subject inside, through a small door that immediately locked behind it. The small room was filled with the sounds of gears turning, machinery clinking, and motors whirring. The display screen was taken over by a large rectangle, resembling a traditional loading screen. After 30 minutes, the process was complete, and the back door of the room unlocked itself. When the researcher walked through the back door, they found another room with a conveyor belt and a row of 24 lockers. Each locker was opened, one at a time, and its contents removed for examination. Inside each, the research team found a different portion of the test subject's body, in a block of some unidentified clear substance. The body was divided in the lockers into these separate parts: brain, lungs and diaphragm, heart, digestive system, reproductive organs, left eye, right eye, upper left torso and arm, upper right torso and arm, lower left torso and upper leg, lower right torso and upper leg, lower left leg and foot, lower right leg and foot, lower left arm and hand, lower right arm and hand, neck and head, upper skeletal system, lower skeletal system, lymphatic and circulatory system, and skin. Whew, a miracle of the human body, right? Boundless in its fascinating complexities. Each block of body parts was placed back in its designated locker, and the second button on the console was pressed. At this point, the doors to the organ lockers sealed themselves shut, and the sound of the machinery working filled the small space once again. This continued for a duration of approximately 45 minutes. When the machinery went silent, a new plexiglass coffin emerged into the main room, with the test subject inside. He looked identical to how he had looked at the start of the experiment, with no evidence that he had previously been disassembled. The blue liquid slowly evaporated from the container, and the test subject opened his eyes. The lead researcher conducted an immediate interview with the reassembled subject, who reported no memory of the process after initial exposure to the blue liquid. They insisted that the process had been like a good night's sleep, which honestly makes us pretty eager to take it for a spin. A medical examination determined that there were only a few changes to the test subject during the disassembly and reassembly. When they returned to consciousness, the test subject's stomach was empty, they were naked, and all of their hair was gone. With this new understanding of SCP-291's anomalous properties, the Foundation decided to continue their experimentation. With each new test, the experiments became more creative and, unsurprisingly, more depraved. First, a D-class subject was placed in the coffin and disassembled. Then, instead of placing the various body parts in their designated lockers, the vital organs were removed from their storage before reassembly was attempted. This resulted in the equipment shutting down completely. A researcher pressed the third button, which forced a hard reset of the entire process, causing all of the blocks of body parts to eject via an exit hatch. During the next experiment, non-vital organs were removed before the subject's body was reassembled. The appendix and gallbladder were left out, and when the subject regained consciousness, these organs were still gone. However, there was no visible damage or scar tissue in their place. They were simply gone, as if they have never been there in the first place. So, if body parts could be removed from a test subject, could new body parts be added? Could existing body parts be replaced with different ones? A D-class subject in need of a skin graft following a flamethrower-based accident was placed in SCP-291. Once taken apart, a portion of healthy skin donated by another, somewhat unwilling D-class subject was placed in the locker, along with the skin already present there. Once the subject was put back together, the healthy skin had replaced the damaged skin with no adverse effects. Repeat attempts at this test showed that it was effective for limb transplants, heart transplants, and kidney transplants, with a 0% failure rate across all tests. After determining that SCP-291 could be used for an untold amount of good, making organ donations easier and safer than ever, the Foundation naturally had to pivot to something more useless, but interesting and likely horrifying. After all, It's not like they could ever just make anomalous technology available to the public, right? 2 D-class subjects, 1 man and 1 woman, were disassembled by SCP-291. The brains of the test subjects were swapped, and then they were reassembled. When they awoke, the subjects had the personalities and memories of the brain placed in their body. In a turn of events previously only seen in blockbuster comedies like Freaky Friday and the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, seminal piece of cinema, the subjects had swapped bodies. They were subsequently disassembled, their request to look at their new bodies naked having been swiftly denied, and the brains were returned to their rightful bodies. After the experiment was finished, the subjects appeared mostly normal. However, they did complain of disorientation as well as mental and physical discomfort over the next several days. After going through 2 brain transplants in 1 day, though, that's really the least you can expect. After perfecting the practice of swapping body parts between different human subjects, the ghoulishly curious research team decided to take things in an interspecies direction. A variety of test subjects, including cats, dogs, lizards, fish, mice, and, of course, humans, were selected for this next round of experiments. 20 tests were performed using these new subjects, and only 3 of the experiments were successful in transferring body parts from an animal of one species to another animal of a different one. Attempts to swap body parts between mammals and reptiles or fish proved disastrous. When a fish and a human were both disassembled and the fish's gills were placed with the human's body parts, neither creature survived the reassembly process. The human awoke with a new set of gills embedded in their neck and immediately began gasping for the oxygen they could not take in. Within minutes, they had suffocated. The fish's fate was even worse. It did not reassemble so much as it became a pile of goo, scales, and 2 floating eyeballs. Experimentation with a human and a lizard yielded similar results, turning the lizard into a puddle of organic matter and killing the human test subject after only a few minutes. As disastrous as the failed cross-species tests were, the successful ones were almost as bad. Trial 001 involved a cat and a human. Not wanting to attempt too much at once, the research team opted to just swap out 1 organ, the left eye. Both subjects survived the transfer and were able to use their new eye. The human subject reported full use of the cat's eye, with improved night vision in addition to trouble seeing color. The cat did not enjoy its new eye nearly as much as the human subject, and had clawed its human eye out of its head by the end of the following week. In Trial 007, a successful brain transfer was performed between an adult human man and an English Mastiff. The man in the Mastiff's body expressed discomfort with walking on all 4s and asked to be returned to his body as soon as possible. The Mastiff in the man's body adjusted to bipedal locomotion in a few hours, but was disassembled after urinating on a researcher's shoes. The final successful trial, and the most unnerving, was Trial 016. A female D-class test subject's reproductive organs were swapped with those of a pregnant Labrador retriever. An ultrasound conducted after the transfer indicated that the Labrador fetuses survived the procedure and could conceivably be carried to term by the human subject. Several members of the research team began to take bets on whether or not she would end up giving birth to puppies, but the transfer was reversed within the day, so we'll never know what exactly would have happened. Perhaps that's for the best. Personally, we hope the Foundation's Ethics Committee gives some of these scientists a very stern talking to about their behavior on this one. When not in use for testing, SCP-291 is to be disconnected from any power sources. At least 2 personnel are positioned outside of its containment at all times, standing guard, and these personnel must be swapped out every week. When it is not connected to any power sources, SCP-291 is considered harmless, though it should still be treated with caution. The main entryway remains closed and locked when there is no available power source, but the door can be opened manually from the inside in the event of an emergency. Any disassembled organisms are stored in a locker in the containment facility, labeled with a Sharpie marker in order to keep track of what specimens are stored there. Whether this is the same Sharpie used to label food in the break room fridge is unknown, but just like Dr. DiRamiro's ham sandwich, it's best to leave these items untouched. Any personnel found to be responsible for missing specimens will be transferred to another project and receive a strongly worded email.
Mobile Task Force Edna 84, also known by the codename and thus upon his Crucible, is on one of the strangest missions they've ever been sent on. They sit in a darkened room, beads of sweat trickling down their brows. The lights of computer monitors shine upon their faces. They're tackling a monster that, if it escapes, will literally devour all of creation. It has no fear, it has no remorse, and if it isn't kept contained by Edna 84, it may escape and wreak havoc across the world. Oh, and did we mention it's trapped in a Minecraft server? You heard us right. SCP-4335 is a cognito-hazardous extra-dimensional being of pure terror, trapped inside a procedurally generated world in the immensely popular game Minecraft. You hear about a lot of horrifying monsters being described as Lovecraftian, but only this monster is Minecraftian. There's a lot that needs explaining here, and we intend to get to all of it. But let's start with how the Foundation keeps this truly exceptional beast contained. The Foundation first discovered SCP-4335 back in 2010, shortly after the alpha version of Minecraft was released. Because of the online nature of the game, it's proven to be impossible to contain 4335 externally, seeing as it isn't confined to any one physical location. Shutting off the server 4335 is found in is not an effective containment method either, as this just causes the entity to simply hop to a different server. The Foundation's greatest fear is that 4335 will one day make the leap out of Minecraft and cause chaos in our world. That's why it's imperative to draft containment procedures for SCP-4335 within the game. This led to the creation of a containment site unlike any other. Site M1, the first official Foundation site made entirely out of Minecraft blocks. Everyone who was originally involved in the server has been removed and amnesticized. Since then, elite SCP Foundation containment specialists and gamers have been constructing the perfect prison for SCP-4335. Site M1 is a large stone complex built into the side of a mountain. It has a number of key features, including a supply area filled with materials vital for 4335's continued containment, chests filled with books that contain SCP-4335's containment procedures, a few animal farms for the purpose of breeding and killing livestock for their meat, the entrance to a mine, several chests containing books specifically designed for civilians to learn about 4335 if they ever breach containment and enter the server, and of course, the actual containment chamber for SCP-4335 itself, which is a little more complicated. 4335's containment chamber is built out of several layers, all made from iron blocks. The outermost cube is 75 by 75 by 75 blocks. The inner cube is 55 by 55 by 55 blocks, and the innermost cube is 25 by 25 by 25 blocks, creating several levels of defense. Finally, one layer within all these others, which contains the anomaly proper, is made from obsidian blocks. SCP-4335 is bound into the center of the containment chamber with a complex mechanism. The outermost cube is completely filled with water, and several dispensers capable of rapidly dispensing large amounts of items in a short amount of time line the cube. The cube also contains several mob farms, which are devices that constantly spawn enemies into the chamber that drop loot when they die. The chamber is essentially designed to funnel a constant flow of items inwards to SCP-4335. There are even contingency measures for if SCP-4335 manages to breach containment. If escape is attempted, blocks of TNT detonate above the ceiling, causing lava to pour into the chamber. At that point, MTF Edna 84 are dispatched into the server to lure 4335 back into its containment chamber. To do this, they fire a mix of fire-resistant potions and ender pearls, which have teleportation capabilities. Interestingly, there's one more basic method of luring SCP-4335 back into the obsidian cube: taunting and insulting. One of SCP-4335's many anomalous abilities is being able to hear people through the screen, and being a proud creature, it often responds to insults by charging in to directly engage the insulter. If SCP-4335 still manages to breach the containment that has been set up for it, then they even expect that it will likely soon hop into another server. At that point, the goal will shift to finding the monster and recontaining it. With containment procedures this complex and extensive, it shouldn't come as a surprise that SCP-4335 rests firmly in the Keter class. What exactly is this anomalous entity?
Why does its containment hinge on constantly providing it with items? And how did it end up in Mojang's popular building and survival game in the first place? SCP-4335, in terms of physical dimensions, appears almost identical to the player character, with an all-black skin. It also appears to be constantly shrouded in a cloud of smoke particles, and has long black tendrils protruding from its back. In some respects, 4335 has been compared to two popular creepypasta figures, Herobrine and the Slenderman. But 4335 is far stranger. Its physical body behaves similarly to most assets native to the game, with a few peculiar, anomalous abilities we'll discuss soon. Handling SCP-4335 is an extremely delicate process. If command blocks, creative mode, or server commands are ever enabled in a server with SCP-4335, the server will instantly shut down, and SCP-4335 will move to a different server. SCP-4335 also uses its tendrils to destroy surrounding blocks before consuming them. With each successful consumption, SCP-4335 grows, and when it reaches sufficient size, it hops to a different server. As you can see, keeping SCP-4335 contained is an uphill battle, but luckily there are two factors on the Foundation's side here. The first is that SCP-4335 is immobilized while consuming items and blocks, limiting its ability to actively escape Foundation forces. The second factor is that SCP-4335 needs a rest period between consuming blocks in order to grow, meaning if its consumption is constant and continuous, it isn't able to grow. These two factors have informed the entirety of the Foundation's containment procedures around SCP-4335. It's locked into its chamber and fed items and blocks constantly, effectively rooting it in place. When SCP-4335 begins to grow, the Foundation also found that the application of Ender Pearls helps reduce it back to its normal size. However, SCP-4335 does have a method of striking back against its captors. 4335 is a Virgin-class multisensory cognitohazard. Anyone viewing it without proper training and protection may experience distressing hallucinations. SCP-4335 is also capable of telepathic speech, with people playing on its server, and as we alluded to earlier, it can also hear any noises you make while playing. Weird is a term thrown around a lot when it comes to SCPs, considering it's pretty much a requirement for the Foundation to take interest in you. But an all-devouring Minecraft demon that can hear you talking through your screen is strange, even by Foundation standards. MTF Edna84 first discovered SCP-4335 in the single-player server of Minecraft user Leaking Heart. 3 team members, Jason Yelsen, Richard Duchamp, and Sheila Freemason, covertly entered the game to investigate and potentially apprehend the creature. When Leaking Heart first discovered their presence on what he thought was a private server, he quickly left, a little creeped out by the sudden intrusion. Thankfully, the trio was still able to locate SCP-4335. They discovered the creature hiding inside a giant crater, as though it had impacted the Earth at considerable speed. Richard Duchamp, who was the leader of the team at the time, made the mistake of looking directly at the entity. In that moment, he experienced the full force of SCP-4335's cognitohazardous effects. He hallucinated, believing that his keyboard was melting before his eyes. In the aftermath of this incident, Duchamp was taken off the case, and Jason Yelsen was promoted to head of the project. Things were still going to get stranger. Yelsen was able to open a dialogue with the creature after containing it in a chamber filled with lava. It asked him whether it had landed in the right location, meaning our world, and Yelsen informed him that it had somehow fallen into the world of Minecraft instead. The creature was at first confused, and then angry and resentful about its situation. It vowed to find its way into our world somehow, and obtain more sustenance. A few months after this, the entity managed to breach containment and hop into another server. Yelsen and 2 others once again managed to track it down and recontain it. But this time, 2 civilians also inhabiting the server were exposed to the anomalous effects of SCP-4335. They weren't hurt, but they did appear strange and incoherent after experiencing 4335's cognitohazards. The Foundation tracked them down in the aftermath and gave them amnestic treatment. 4335 was contained shortly thereafter. Once again, Yeltsin came face to face with his new foe. 8 months after being captured, 4335 granted Yeltsin another interview from containment. 4335 admitted that it almost respected Yeltsin and the rest of the Foundation for figuring out how to capture and contain it so quickly. In exchange, it would give the Foundation something extremely valuable: information. First, it asked one question of Yeltsin: how does he define creation? Yeltsin replied, something that is built and brought into this universe by a sapient being using other things from this universe. 4335 agreed. It went on to explain that it came from a universe devoid of creation, a dark and unknowable place, filled with nothing but violent random chaos. Its dimension existed directly above ours, and it often looked down at us through a dimensional window, fascinated by all the creation below. It plotted and dreamed to one day infiltrate our reality, and Yeltsin finally had the opportunity to ask the magic question, why? Though he wasn't quite ready for the brutal honesty of SCP-4335's reply.
I do not like to lie, so I will tell you now. I wish to suck it dry of the toys of whatever force controls your universe. Destroy the light, destroy the earth, and destroy humanity. It reminded me of me, a blubbering mass of intelligence and order. It sickens me in ways I cannot comprehend. I hope you understand.
SCP-4335 was a connoisseur of creation, and it sought to devour all of it. In this moment, Yeltsin realized what an incredibly dangerous entity he was dealing with. The only mystery was why this creature had somehow landed in Minecraft instead of our world, which appeared to be the only thing that saved us. But Yeltsin didn't have time to think. 4335 was about to stage another daring escape attempt. One of its tendrils reached out and attacked Yeltsin's player character. In that moment, the real-life Yeltsin began to hallucinate and panic. Suddenly back in the game, a series of abnormally tall, slender black figures appeared and began deconstructing the containment chamber around SCP-4335. It had somehow summoned new minions into the game to assist in this containment breach. Jason Yeltsin entered cognito hazard quarantine following this incident and was removed from the project. And he wasn't the only one affected by this incident. Following the first appearance of these long, dark figures, players across the globe began to experience them appearing in their own games. The Foundation managed to find a solution. They contacted Mojang and had the creatures patched into the game during the next update, as a new non-anomalous entity, which seemed to stop 4335 from being able to use them as its own tools. They're now known as the Endermen, and are beloved among fans for being one of the creepier enemies. To this day, containment efforts continue for SCP-4335, but there's only one question left. Why did the entity fall into Minecraft rather than our world? The file posits the most likely answer, because 4335 defines creation as elements made by sapient beings. In Minecraft, the most popular game in the world at the height of 4335's power, everything that exists is the product of code made by humans. Creation is truly abundant there. As for our world, in SCP-4335's extra-dimensional eyes, there is no creation, no intelligent design, no soothing piano soundtrack, just frightening, chaotic randomness which is too unlike its own dimension. So even if SCP-4335 ever did arrive in our reality, it would likely be disappointed by how little there is to eat. Now check out SCP-3082, Neverland's Lost Boys and Girls, and SCP-3008 Trapped in IKEA for more fascinating and strange locations from the world of the SCP Foundation.